A very good evening to all of you. I really have to think twice before even I say that because it's always a morning here. A very good evening to all of you in India and elsewhere, wherever you may be zooming in from. A very warm welcome from our forum, the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. Just to give you a brief of who we are and what we do, you can check us out at www.hichs.org. We're a team of professionals. We provide that link between the academic and the non-academic world, do virtual courses, campus courses, heritage walks, and everything that has to do with the Himalayas, nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. It has to be the Himalayas. So when Siddharth came out with this book, the whole series, he talked about, and when he came out with the book Fossils, well, I had to, ask him to come here and talk about it. The Himalayas have been such an integral part of my own, upbringing and the way I've navigated my life. The Himalayas have been omnipresent. I am an anthropological archaeologist. And to me, coming back, navigating that world of archaeology and coming back to the Himalayas has been a journey of sorts. And to me, bringing in people who love the Himalayas as much as I do, maybe more, is it's kind of very satisfying that with this forum, one can kind of communicate with others who love the mountains as much as we do, and do something purposeful with it, meaningful, and just take them to the next level. They're already majestic and high, but, to really take us out there where they bring more meaning to our lives. And with that, I'm so happy that Siddharth is here with us today with his book Fossil, and of course the whole series that has been published by Lost Rocks. And I have posted one of the links of Siddharth's article write-up of the Lost Rocks project. It's an art project, and he'll tell you more about it as he brings out his introduction. But the series itself is very fascinating to think of something as tangible and as silent as rocks and giving it meaning and giving it a voice. I think that's amazing. And of course, when you think about the Himalayas, you think of fossils, and Siddharth has beautifully conveyed that in verse. And it's so, when you think about the Himalayas, you really think with your heart and you want to write about it. And I think poetry comes naturally when you really feel connected to something like this. And about Siddharth now. Siddharth Pandey. I got to know him through, of course, our forum, through his Instagram account, through his wonderful brother Abhimanyu, who's pursuing his anthropological studies in Germany, and a legacy also of sorts, where Siddharth's father was instrumental in having set up the Great Himalayan National Park. And I've oftentimes heard his mother sing beautiful folk songs of the Himalayas. And in due course, I would love to invite her too on our forum. So Siddharth has grown up in that environment that makes him worthy of talking about the Himalayas. He's a writer, photographer, and curator hailing from Shimla, currently based in the National Capital Region of Delhi. He has a PhD in English and Materiality Studies from the Faculty of Education, University of Cambridge, and an MPhil from the same institution. For these degrees, he was awarded the full Cambridge International Scholarship and the Cambridge Shared Commonwealth Scholarship, in addition to other awards and grants. His PhD looked at the ways in notions of craft and materiality, how they impact the generation of magic and wonder in fantasy literature. After his PhD, he was awarded a summer research fellowship in global history at Ludwig Maximilian University, as well as a visiting fellowship in art history at Yale University. Since 2020, he has been based in Delhi as a writer and has published in numerous national media platforms such as The Pioneer, The Indian Express, The Hindu, Outlook, The Quint, Scroll, and Livewire. In 2020, he was invited to become part of the global arts project titled Lost Rocks, helmed from Tasmania, which aimed to usher a fresh creative geological consciousness around rocks and metals. Pandey's first book, titled Fossil, was published under the aegis of this project in August 2021 as the only Asian artist from a selection of 40 commissioned writers from all over the world. His other work as an artist has been recognized by some of the world's leading museums, including the Victorian Albert in London, the Oriental Museum in Durham, and Gaity's Theatre Tavern Gallery, which I have visited in Shimla. In 2016 and 2017, he served on the final jury panel for the Queen's Commonwealth Essay Writing Competition, the world's largest and oldest literary contest for school children running across 54 countries. At present, he's researching his hometown Shimla for 2 new histories. And today's talk, he will be kind of introducing his book and excerpts from the book. So all of you who haven't yet had a chance to read it, and of course, I might like to add, and I'll post this, his publishers who are based in Australia, you can purchase the books from their website, and I will post the link for the convenience of all the audience today, and I'll post it on the website as well. And after that, of course, we have the illustrious Dr. Saif Mahmood today in our midst. And I couldn't have thought of a book talk without him. He's a very dear friend, and having seen him and heard him engage with so many literary luminaries, and he himself, the writer of a wonderful book, The Beloved Delhi and Articles, I thought it's very, very important that he be here with us on this occasion and help me navigate through a book talk. I think it's one of the first book talks I'm doing. So Saif, I need your support. And Saif, for those of you who want to read more about Saif's work, he has written this amazing work on the Mughal poets, the beloved Delhi, a Mughal city and a greatest poet. He is a New Delhi-based writer, poetry and literature critic, commentator, translator, traveler, and rights activist. He's an advocate at the Supreme Court of India. We met while we were advocates, and well, I departed and he's still there, and he's a wonderful lawyer. He holds a doctorate in constitutional law, a leading home in Urdu culture and literary heritage. Saif speaks and writes on diverse issues ranging from law to literature. He's the founder of South Asian Alliance for Literature, Art and Culture, and his works regularly appear in various publications and news websites. Apart from being that, he is an amazing person who's deeply connected to his roots, culture, and his friends, of course. And about me, well, you can read about me on the Himalayan Institute website. I'm an anthropological archaeologist, specialize in Egyptian archaeology and now Himalayan archaeology. And I just consider myself a seeker of knowledge. And with that knowledge, I feel I can make a connect with, the larger world who seeks knowledge too. So we're all connected to each other. And I'm very happy that all of you have congregated today to take out time in listening to what fossils have to say. So with that, Siddharth, over to you. Siddharth will be reading out his excerpts, and then we will zoom in with questions and all of that. So at this point, I would urge all of you to mute your mics and put your videos off. And once Siddharth is done, Saif and I will take the lead in asking questions and having this conversation going. And all of you can chime in then as well. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you, Sonali. Just let me know when the video is shared. The presentation is shared.
Yes, I can see the screen. You just need to put it on.
Yes, I will do that. I'll just do that. I'll just put it on full screen. Is it?
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Fantastic. Superb. Okay. Great. So and you can hear me properly, right?
Yes, you may not be able to see me now because all our eyes are focused on you.
Of course. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, okay. That's absolutely fine. Okay, great. Fantastic. Fine. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. It's absolutely a huge joy, a pleasure, a privilege to be here again at the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. We did have a talk, I think, long time ago. I think it's been a year now, and I just consider my relationship with Sonali and everything that has happened, after that, and with these lovely talks and all lovely discussions and all, just one of my very big fortunes and good fortunes and privileges. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and this happens to be my first book talk on fossil. So of course it's something which is very special, and I think it will always stay with me. I'm also utterly grateful that Sonali thought of bringing someone as illustrious and as great a literary scholar as Dr. Saif Mahmood, and I'm just so delighted and privileged to be sharing the platform with him as well. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss and share once my readings are over. But before I begin these readings, I would like to just tell a little bit about the project. We'll be going into detail only during the discussion. So this is a project, as Sonali said, called The Lost Rocks, and it was the roots of it go back to 2014, when the editors, curators, publishers, this artist duo, Margaret Woodward and Justy Phillips, one of them is here. Hello again, Margaret. When they thought of devising something, so they are Tasmania-based artists, and they have been working a lot with landscape and geology and geography, they decide, sorry to pause here, but I'm just hearing some disturbance. So if I can just request everyone to just put their mics on mute, I'll be really grateful. Thank you. Yeah, so they decided on to make this kind of a project called The Lost Rocks under the aegis of their publishing platform, which is very interestingly titled A Published Event, under which they wanted to create some sort of as Sonali was also saying, a sort of a creative consciousness, usher a creative consciousness regarding rocks and geology, things and regarding rocks, geology, metals, basically things and elements that go under the surface of the earth and which we don't usually pay attention in our day-to-day lives, right? But so the idea was basically to bring together around 40 different artists from all over, the artist writers, interdisciplinary practitioners from all over the world, and to create what is called what they now call a library of rocks, which you can view on your right as well. And from 2015 to this year, over the course of 5 years, they brought these wonderful groups of few books each, between 7 to 10 or 6 to 10 books each every year. And by now we already have 42 books, and the final book, which is being written by Margaret and Justy, is just I think it's about to go for publication as well. So there'll be a total of 43 books. So it's a very slow building and slow publishing project, quite in sync with the very topic that is being explored here. And I got to know Margaret and Justy in 2019 November, when I was a visiting fellow in art history at Yale University, and I met them there for the first. I had no idea about their work prior to that, so I always look back to that one seminar that was held just as we were about to leave for our respective countries at the end of our fellowship in early November 2019. And it was a seminar that we used to bring together all scholars and practitioners who were there at Yale at that particular time, working in art and art history and allied subjects. And they made this presentation on the Lost Rocks. And I was there researching the Himalayas. As Sonali said, that I've been working on Shimla's histories and histories of hill stations in India. So that's what I was researching. And as Margaret and Justy were making their presentation, I just felt this, utter sort of almost a visceral connection with the project, as it were. And I must also confess here that I did not exactly understand what the project was, but often in life, I think we come across things or situations where you don't exactly comprehend everything, and yet you feel a connection to that particular aspect, or particular situation or whatever it is. And so at the end of the seminar, I went to them and I just thanked them and congratulated them on their wonderful project. And that time it was, I think, in its 3rd year. And I visited their workshop at Yale in New Haven, where the university is. And And that was it. We just became friends on the basis of just 2 meetings, and then we left for our respective countries. And then we decided to be in touch over social media. And I had just joined Instagram then. And they have a lovely Instagram page. It's called A Published Event, and I think all of you should follow them as well. And I used to follow them, and they used to follow me. And I used to just marvel at these beautiful books. So around 35, 40, 30, no, 20 to 30 books had already been published by then. And then, of course, COVID happened and the world changed in 2020. And towards the end of 2020, in December, I got this beautiful, generous invitation by Margaret and Justy asking me to contribute to the final scene, the final group, which you can see on your left, the final 6 books of the 43 books. And I was absolutely thrilled, I must say. And they asked me to write a book on fossil. And as you can see, that there are lots and lots of different kinds of elements, metals, and rocks that have been covered under this huge project: bauxite, mudstone, granite, fossil, silver, gold, sulfur, all those kind of things. And when I was given this particular rock, and they told me to write a book of around 96 pages. Every book is 96 pages, so the format is very, very precise in that particular manner. I was absolutely overwhelmed, yes, but it also became quite a challenge. And yet it was again one of those things where again I did not quite know what I would be doing, but within few hours of receiving their email, I said, yes, I'll write a book, without knowing hardly anything. So I must say here that I'm not a poet. I have never written poems except I think two times, once as a child and once during my college, and that was it. And to be very honest, poetry never even fascinated me. When I joined Delhi University in 2005, and I was there for 7 years, and I was just bowled over by almost every second, third person studying English would be writing some or the other poetry. And somehow it was a form that just never ever interested me. It wasn't that I hated it or anything. It was just not, I just didn't feel that kind of a connection. Um, so um, so it was, to delve into poetry and to use a form of which I had almost no idea about. Of course, I had read hundreds and hundreds of poems. As an English literature student, you are expected to do that. Um, and when I received this invitation, I just felt that it needs to be it. I just need to push my boundaries. My forte otherwise would be in prose, and as a creative nonfiction writer. So I love writing essays and all, and a lot of people within this series have been writing a lot of essays as well, and anecdotes and prose in prose form in all of these 42, 43 books. But I just felt that I want to try something else. And the other thing was, I was neither a poet, so I was also not a paleontologist who study fossils. I was not a geologist. And if you asked me even now, if you ask me any technical information, I think I'll not be able to answer anything properly, except for that the Himalayas formed because of the collision of the two plates, and the fossils that are found there belong to the marine life. And that is it. I think I don't have any knowledge. So this was basically an invitation which was so utterly, it was just filled with a kind of risk, but it was also filled with a kind of an opportunity. And the biggest risk was that I had just 2 months to finish it, because Margaret and Justy were very, very clear that I need to finish the book by the beginning of March. So it was essentially 2 months. So when I received the invitation, I immediately started thinking about Himalayan fossils and, the actual ammonites and all, and which are found there across the range of the great Himalayas, right across the 7-8 countries in which the range runs. But it became quite clear to me as I started thinking about it, as I started researching about it, and as I just started, just dreaming about it as well, in a manner of speaking, that I wouldn't be writing something which would relate to literal rocks or fossils. Of course, the actual rocks and fossils would feature into this, but it became clear to me that there is definitely a certain metaphorical and symbolic sense in which the word and the idea of fossil operates. Here is a rock, or here is an entity which basically brings together the past and present in a very crafted sort of a manner. Here is something that brings together that sense of deadness, because of course, that animal or that thing or that plant that the fossil conserves is no more. And yet, as we are holding it, we are perceiving it in some sort of an alive sort of a manner, right? Here is a rock that also brings together the sea and the land. So all those kind of things started working in my mind, and I knew that it would become an exploration of kind of a symbolic and metaphorical nature. But the other thing that also became quite clear to me was that that fossils, if I were to extrapolate and explore the concept in a very wide sense, don't only belong to the land as it were, but it also belongs to the realm of gods and goddesses, and particularly in Hindu cultures, which is to say that across the sacred geography of India, we worship gods, goddesses, particularly Shiva and Sati, Shakti, Vishnu, in stone forms. Everywhere you would hear in every other region that this stone was found, and this is the representation of Shiva, or the piece of this piece of Sati's body, this part of Sati's body fell here, and then this became a stone, and then that is what is worshipped, etc., etc. So I was quite pulled in and almost sort of seduced by this particular concept of the god being a fossil, in itself. And therefore I ended up writing quite a few poems within these days. This is a collection of 8 long narrative poems, and I ended up writing quite a few poems which configure the space of the sacred space of Indian gods through the lens of stones and fossils and all. And so therefore there was a dual sense. One was a geological sense, the actual geological sense of Himalayas and all, Himalayan fossils, and then there was the religious spiritual sense of fossils as well. And this then therefore obviously it became a very exciting journey. And but I must also add here that at least until the first month, I really had no idea what the book would look like. And there were drafts upon drafts upon drafts that I kept writing and, scratching away and canceling and throwing in the dustbin and all. But it was in the second month, I think, early part of the second month, the final month, where I think that the book just took a shape it started taking a shape of itself. And I realized that having started this journey, my own thinking journey of deliberating upon how a fossil can be explored in a creative sense, which was also the brief given by Margaret and Justy. I realized that I was very keen to write a book on I was very keen to write some sort of a narrative that would cover the arc from the birth of the Himalayas to the birth of mankind. And it's something which happened quite late. So now that I read my own work, it surprises me because this is not something that I had started with at all. It's as if the poems and the materiality of the book itself took a life of its own. And so I wrote these 8 poems which fit into 3 sections. The first is called In Praise of Touch, the second is called Devbhumi, and the third is called Lineages. And all of these poems are in some way, they are loosely sort of interconnected, and they go back. It's a kind of a personal, geological, mythological, fantastical journey, all of it clubbed together. So In Praise of Touch, the first part of the book, explores the idea of the formation of the Himalayas that led to the creation of these fossils. But it's not a sort of a direct exploration. It's of course it's a poetic exploration where I make these parallels between the touch of my mother. I talk about her hands, and I then talk about the hands of the Himalayas, the two plates colliding together. Touch, I'm sure we'll discuss this later during our discussion as well. But touch is it's a sense that I have been exploring quite a lot during my PhD and even otherwise. The human senses fascinate me quite a lot. So the first part, In Praise of Touch, has 2 poems which talk about just the idea of various forces and elements coming together, both within the geological realm and also within my own personal childhood realm. And I'll be reading something from that. The second part is called Devbhumi, Land of the Gods. It translates into Land of the Gods, and it's about it's a 3 of the 4 poems are retellings of quite popular myths from various parts of the Himalayas, which eventually end up thinking about fossils as a version of God. And the fourth poem is, which I'll be reading as well, is also quite related to religious and sacred figures and sacred landscapes. And in the final part, which is called Lineages, I write two poems. One is called Cairn and another is called Himalayas Sobathuensis. I'll see if I'll have time to read one of those poems. But in the final part, basically, I sort of continue this exploration, this metaphorical exploration of fossil, and end at a with a myth of my own. I mean, having plowed through so many myths and all, I just felt the need of creating a sort of a creative sort of a myth by the very end, and we could talk about that in the main discussion. So that's it. And all of these 8 poems, then at the very end, they lead to, or rather the word should be yield. They yield a specific metaphorical, symbolic, cosmological definition of what a fossil is, the definitions which I then collect together and put in the conclusion, which is called the coda. And the book is interspersed with around 8 photographs, both by me and my brother. Both of us are lovers of the Himalayas. So with that background, I have 3 poems in decreasing order of length. So first is the longest, second is medium sized, and the third is the shortest. And the first is from In Praise of Touch, and the rest 2 are from the middle section, Dev Bhumi. And I do have a 4th poem from the 3rd section as well, but I think I'll keep it for later after we have had our discussions. Okay. So yeah. So before I just start reading, I must say that this is one of the one quotation by the great British poet Alice Oswald, which has often, it has stuck with me. And it says, it's from her poem called Mountains, and it says that, and you feel by instinct in the distance the bigger mountains hidden by the mountains, which is the smaller mountains, like intentions among suggestions. And this is a very, very popular poem by Alice Oswald. She's loved across Britain and in different parts of the world for her very precise understanding and understandings of nature. And I love this concept of mountains being, these higher mountains being intentions among suggestions, which is to say that once you are living in the Himalayas, as Sonali was also saying, that there is a different kind of power and a different kind of presence at work. I mean, you don't have to do anything in order to feel it, just be attentive about it. And that those distant snow-clad mountains which have been there for millions and millions of years, they just sort of consume you, and just have a certain sort of a magnetic, magical pull on your mind and mindscape, right? And those, but those, interestingly, as most of us living in India would understand, is that we have to trudge through the smaller ranges, the shorter mountains, in order to reach the higher mountains, which is what the second line here conveys. And the third line, like intentions among suggestions, is also quite telling, because to think of course, the entire Himalayan landscape as filled with suggestions, but when you start thinking about the landscape in a very particular manner or in a concerted manner, you realize that suggestions then translate into, or sort of condense into, intentions. And I think I love the word intentions, because I throughout the book, I think I was trying to figure out a creative vocabulary regarding the intentionality of mountains. What is it to be a mountain? What is it to be a place filled with fossils and rocks? So I wanted to preface my talk with this thing, and now I'll just go on reading my poems as well. So if you have your screens open, I'm sharing it so that you can read along as well. Yeah, and the first poem from the section In Praise of Touch, it's called Incipience. There is a way in which my childhood meets the youth of the Himalayas. This is the way of haptic ingenuity, worming itself through the folds of stone, the foliage of plants. This is the way of ornamentation and arrangement, of imagination and alignment. This is the way of my mother's rockery, mimicking the knolls and swells of the surrounding valley, writing the story that each ingredient wished to tell within a concert of textures. A rock pile ceases to be a rock pile at the moment a single man contemplates it, bearing within him the image of a cathedral. So it was that many years ago, when we lived on a story without a lawn or a garden, my mother envisioned a handful of shingles with a bucket full of mud and an assortment of plants into an orchestra of levels that continually grew with my random walks by the riverbed, the travels of my father, the spirited antics of my brother's action figures, traipsing the turns of soil and slope in a world of their own. All night long, those miniature men would remain outside, soaking in the dewy chill, planning an attack or a rendezvous with their partners, peeping from the gaps of shoots in the rock-writhing roots. And under the cover of a starry sky, swilling with the vigor of the river nearby, itself empowered by the edits of the longest epic. This is the river Vyas, by the way, which is named after Vyas, who wrote the longest epic, the Mahabharata. Stood a deity mountain, mirroring the rockery's manifold energies. Bijli Mahadev, I'll just change it now. Bijli Mahadev, the Shiva of lightning, a version of the god of destruction fashioned out of annihilation. Fashioned out of annihilation like a self-reflexive act. Eons ago, he had decided to take upon himself the rage of the sky's thunder to alleviate the fear of the mountain folk thrown asunder. And so it was arranged between him and the weather god that Shiva's summit stone manifestation, the linga, would pulverize every few years by the assault of those heavenly bolts, only to be made again with the hands of the hill dwellers in an endless cycle of sacrifice, preservation, and succession. Every day, when I returned from school to home, I witnessed this summit shrine majestically overlooking the diminutive rockery from a distance, exchanging the messages of mud and stone across the crisp currents of valley winds, meditating on the touch that had sculpted them both. Part 2 of the same poem. Here in the Himalayas, splitting and suturing have always gone hand in hand. This is the land that has known the link between creation and chaos long before it came into being. 100 million years ago, when India lurked in the south as Greater India, it disbanded from Gondwana land to begin a voyage of tenacity and independence. Riding on the already expanding Tithian Ocean, this drifting landmass demonstrated the proclivity for north-mindedness from the moment of its separation. Onwards it sped, millimeter by millimeter, gobbling up the smaller islands with bursts of volcanic lava, until 50 million years later, it met its challenger in the larger Eurasia. Thus unfolded prehistory's longest touch, as rock met with rock, and a means was found to slowly tighten the clasp by thrusting India's oceanic crust under the skin of its newfound partner's grasp, subduction. But the embrace wasn't finished yet, for the shocks spread through the mesa overhead, the Tibetan plateau. Crumpling and contorting, flailing and fighting, the margin evolved through the melted material over a series of shakeups. This is the way our land lifted up from liquid and divided itself along 4 fits, greater, middle, and lower, and a plateau roof stretching like an inverse burr. This is the land of knots and intersections, nubs, and interjections. But seen from afar, there is a pattern to all this confusion, for here lies the contour of Shiva's crescent, crowning the subcontinent in a finial firmament. And in these pinnacles reside the seeds of all pride, the kernels of all might, the yardstick of all heights. In the space of 100 ages of the gods, I could not describe to you the glories of the Himalayas. But the thing about heights is that they cannot exist without depths, for it is in the pits that peaks are dreamed of, and it is in the foundations that fruits are fostered. Here in the Himalayas, contradictions are the bedrock of continuity. A fossil is a fusion of past's promise with future's present. This is the first poem. I'll now go on to my second poem, which is from the section Dev Bhumi, and it's called Shaligram. And Shaligrams are basically ammonites that are found across Himalayas, which are worshipped as forms of Vishnu, the protector. Shaligram, also known as Salagrama. If the notion of preservation were to find a shape and form, it would be akin to a circle or circles breathing through the deeds of devotion and design, like a nascent vase guarding the mud whirling out of a potter's wheel, charting the alleyway of attention, the route of resuscitation. For design holds the world together, preceding man's work by millions of years, determining the glory of godliness. And what is godliness but illumination taking the shape of perfection? And what is perfection but halos birthing halos in a limitless sequence of circles, spinning into spirals? Circles and spirals, the most primordial of all profiles that constitute the pedigree of our universe through profuse repetitions, traversing countries and continents, cataloging mankind's innate desire to persistently seek precision and poetry, equilibrium and infinity. Look at the Earth orbiting the sun and behold the galaxies charging through the cosmos, all churned by that one center whose arms herald the winds of change via a whirlpool of rotations, always rounding and always looping like the arcs defining Vishnu's principal objects, the spherical mace to punish the criminal, the curving lotus to bless all with fragrance, the whizzing weapon disc glowing like the sun, the conical conch to purify the present. In these articles pirouette the preserver's DNA, his enlightening faith that cautions men and women from going astray. But even though these instruments of divine power exist in a world beyond our senses, far from our reach, a substance is found here in the Himalayas with the ancestry of the deep seas that weaves subtly the four symbols within a crucible of vortices, a rock bearing the imprints of a celestial ecstasy, Shaligram. In its mutating jet black form, the Shaligram remembers a life many eternities old, when Tithian still ruled the mountain floor, adrift with a billion trillion waves, continuously breaking in supreme abandon the essence of water. For before concretizing into these swirling masses of Vishnu's wisdom, Shaligrams dwelled as mollusks swinging through the deep blues, protected by their rounded shells like coils of the great snake on which Vishnu rests in the colossal ocean and dreams our world into existence. So even back then, the helices and the convolutes, the twists and the twirls bridged the gap between biology and theology. And when the Himalayas finally rose through enormous eras of efforts and eruptions, these ammonites retained their curling dispositions, honoring their proudest protrusions. As soil and dirt and wind and sunshine worked their way into the pits of these spirals, the ensuing firmness of the once hollowed shells came to acquire the traces of the four signs and their 24 permutations, endowing the waterborne rocks with hallowed functions, their pious abstractions. Today, when you walk the Himalayan valleys of Spiti or Nepal, you will come across the memories of a marine life embossed and engraved with minute lobes and saddles, bulges and indentations, all within the perfected contours of these little ammonites, silently revealing that everything you touch with the tap of your feet is a tendril of Vishnu, an ocean in retreat. A fossil is a fold of energy, welding man to his maker. Now for the third and final poem before we start the discussion. This is just the image of a Shaligram that I made along with the four symbols of Vishnu, the conch, the disc, the mace, and the lotus. Right, this is striations, and I wanted to write a book, a poem on just the idea of traces and lines, which are fossils in themselves. Were it not for the were it not for the pathways between 2 points, however circuitous, however blurred, our world would have remained an amorphous space, devoid of character, deprived of keenness. Reality and its other endure because of striations relating everything to everything, surfacing the inside, inlaying the outside. Epochs before the first cartographer took up his compass and divider to measure the planet through his web of lines, and eras prior to the maiden architect exercising his incisive artistry, our planet had already begun to organize itself through the principles of linearity, materializing time with the rudiments of rocks. In the highest of peaks here in the Himalayas, when the strongest sun occasionally washes away the snow sheets, you witness the intercalated rows of stones and organisms pushing upwards and outwards with the ghosts of an ocean, like mastheads proclaiming the advent of self-assured kingdoms. And when you cut through the frozen corals unearthed in their lofty valleys, there too you discover streaks marking their inner nature, albeit of a different stature. For these are rings rather than rows, each a proof of a day lived in the growing coral's trajectory. Once the circular bands exhaust the excursion of a year, the coral cultivates a concentrated circle around the 365 girdles and relaunches another cycle of expanding wheels. Lines are accordingly the ways through which these rocks mark Earth's rotation, and there are far older corals indexing longer years with added circles. But between the rows and the rings also lie other imprints, one of them being the worlds of holy feet, So whether it is Shimla's highest Jhakhu hill, where the monkey god Hanuman rested for a jiffy in his flight from the northern nib to the southern bit, or whether they are the Bhutanese monasteries where the second Buddha Padmasambhava stepped in to bless as Guru Rinpoche, the stony ground melts away in seamless shapes to cast a touch of hallowed grace. Not all traces, though, are fully tactile, for there is a mythical line running through Kailash's symmetrical pyramid that secretly swivels our universe as an axis since many an eternity. And then there are the outlines kissing the oceanic azure skies that often take the shape of a story or a godly body. In Uttarakhand, you have the revered Panchachuli, the 5 cooking hearths of the Pandava brothers walking inversely amidst 6 sweeping points. And in West Bengal, you climb the Sandakphu pinnacle, crowning the ridge of Singalila to witness the calm of the sleeping Buddha, traceable amongst the world's tallest summits. A fossil is a flight of linearity, molding matter into its mystical meaning. So that would be for my initial reading, and this photograph is of the Kailash mountain taken by my brother, who has also written a book on Kailash Yatra. Yeah. Over to you, Sonali and Saif.
Thank you so much, Siddharth, for such a wonderful read. And, as you were kind of reading out, it's interesting that, the many times that you read, you kind of go deeper into what is written. I think that's true for every read, but especially when you're kind of listening to verses, find more meaning, and you understand it from a very different perspective time. So as you were reading, I was like, I didn't connect, in that way earlier. Now I am. So
thank you.
Yeah, so I'll set the stage for Saif. So Saif, if you could take the lead and, asking, and as I've got the book here, right here.
Of course.
Left to me, I would just like Siddharth to continue reading because it was really beautiful. It was, that I must confess here that I find myself very inadequate actually to talk in this session, and my reasons for coming here are almost exactly like yours, Siddharth, for writing this book, which are very personal in nature, because I speak as a lover of poetry, as a lover of the mountains, and who dare says no to Sonali. So, but I'm very glad that I did, because I read your book. Let me confess that I read your book only this morning.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
I wish I would have read it earlier. But anyway, as I said, I would have liked you to continue reading, and I would maybe ask you to read something else. But since some questions are expected, like you are the presiding deity today. और the दूल्हा आज के सेशन के जो है ना वो आप ही. Tell me something. I want to start with asking you a very basic question, because you said that this is your first poetry project, so to say. And even while you were studying literature, you were not really enamored by poetry. And the poetry comes naturally to you when you talk about the mountains. So tell us, what does poetry mean to you?
Thank you, first of all. Thank you for all your appreciation and for your keen listening and for taking out the time from your very, very schedule and everything. And I'm just very happy that both of you are here.
Singular pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. Thank you so much. What does poetry mean to me? So I'll be very honest. As I was saying, that I was not enamored by poetry. It's as simple as that, and I used to feel in my sometimes in my bachelor's and master that is there something wrong with me, because almost every other person is writing, or talking in poetic terms and all. But I think that really doesn't mean that I was unpoetic or didn't understand the value of poetry. I think a written poem within the textual form is just one of the many ways that conveys the sense of what is poetic, right, or poeticism. So I am a lover of the Himalayas. I've grown up with my mother singing traditional folk Himachali songs, and there is obviously a massive sense of poetry and poeticism within Himalayan traditional songs, or for that matter, any traditional songs from all over the world, right? So that sense of rhythm, that sense of lay, tal, all those kind of things are very, very crucial to me. Then, of course, I love music. I play and compose on piano, and also there is obviously a sense of poetry working in terms of rhythm and meter and all those kind of things. It's just in the written sense, it took me a while basically to appreciate the form for what it is. So, but I must say that even from my very first year of my bachelor's, I was enamored literally by poetic prose. I mean, that was something that was, I mean, I could find poetry in say something like, a 19th century great text like Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, or for that matter, a 20th century Indian English text. I would always be looking for that sense of beauty and rhythm and evocativeness, if that's a word, within prose, because I think prose was my forte. So there was poetry there was poetry in the music, as I was saying. Then there was poetry in, I'm a huge lover and admirer of architecture. So of course, all best architecture eventually conveys itself through some sort of a poeticism and poetry, right? And Bollywood songs and all of that. But the first time I think it really sort of hit me as a genre in a very big sense was when I was in Cambridge, and I was doing my PhD, and that was in fantasy literature. And so I was it was anyway a very sort of a niche kind of a thing. Very few people were researching fantasy and children's literature that time in India. And so I was quite enamored by all the magical worlds, and I wrote my thesis on magic in British fantasy fiction. But as I was doing that, I also got drawn to a lot of literature on landscape, because all best fantasies are always rooted in some sort of a landscape. And Britain, which is sort of the birthplace of modern English fantasy, is also the birthplace of modern English nature writing, right? So that it was that kind of a link that was very crucial for me. And it's there during my time at Cambridge 5, 6, 7 years ago, that I discovered the works of my mentor and the person who has influenced me the most, Robert Macfarlane. And it was in his, so he's not a poet, he's a prose person, but he has been over and over called a prose poet, again and again. And it was in his descriptions of landscape and nature and everything like that I started appreciating poetry. So it's an odd way of getting to a form, which is a form in itself, but I'm getting it through the prose form. So it was through the works of Robert Macfarlane, and then he himself became a poet as well, with Jackie Morris, who's listening to this lecture as well.
Yes.
Right? And they produced such a brilliant modern classic of children's literature, The Lost Rocks and then The Lost Spells, right? So it was just through this very circuitous sort of way in which I got introduced to poetry. And then of course I started discovering lots and lots of writings on poetry, like what is poetry. And I think I'll go with what the French novelist and essayist Nathalie Sarraute, I think, says about poetry, which is that poetry is the art of making invisible visible. I think that just sums it everything, because all of these things, this thing about fossil rocks, etc., everything was just invisible, both in a literal sense and in a metaphorical. I had never thought that I would write something on rocks. I was always that I knew that my first book has to be on Shimla and on nothing else. And then suddenly something like this comes. So I would go with F.O. Sarraute's explanation that I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the word right, because it's a French name, but the art of making invisible visible. And the second definition of, I think, the Scottish poet Edwin Morgan, when he says that poetry is the brilliant interface of the human and the non-human. So I think these two definitions I would understand to be my understanding of poetry. So
we have a brilliant comment by Jackie Morris here. She says maybe we need to take down those barriers between prose and poetry.
Yes,
we can then just call it writing, and there's good and bad, and yours is beautiful.
Thank you, Jackie. I can't tell you how utterly thrilled I am that you are here and sending your comments. Thank you. Yeah, so that would be my long answer to you. Yeah.
That's a good answer, actually.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
I would like to ask you something. So,
Yes.
Siddharth, here in the Himalayas, I have a project called Myth and Reality. So, where I'm not corroborating myth with reality, but basically looking at how myths have transmitted from generation to generation, how does it play out in the in daily life and our engagement, with our past. And I feel like while reading your poetry, your take on myths, that how you described in your Dev Bhumi chapter
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
with Bijli Mahadev, and I've been to most of these sites, and
Yes.
I
Yes.
love the way that you give it a touch that myth finds a basis in the Himalayas. I never thought of it that way, and the way you entwine those myths with creation and change and continuity. Um, and with rocks, something as silent as rocks. Where did
Yeah.
that inspiration come from the myths that you've read? And I just want to ask you about that whole process, because I
Yeah.
find more meaning in my work through your work, and that's
Yeah.
inspirational.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, thank you. That's a very rich question, and I'll take a while to answer it in as much complexity as possible. So I think all of us here from India, at least, we would remember that one poem from our childhood, Sohanlal Dwivedi, the great Gandhian and the poet and the nationalist, who "Khada Himalay bata raha hai, डरो ना आंधी पानी में, खड़े रहो तुम अविचल होकर हर संकट तूफानों में," which basically translate loosely into, for anyone who doesn't know Hindi, is the standing Himalayas are telling you to be courageous and to not give in to any kind of problems or to any kind of adversities that are coming in your face. And of course, Sohanlal Dwivedi was a Gandhian, so of course there's an entire political angle to that poem as well. And why I'm quoting it here is that because since our childhood, we are, and even generally speaking, we are conditioned to look at mountains as these symbols of stability, as these symbols of immobility, right? Not only symbols, but like materials of things which would never change or have a certain eternity to themselves, and which is obviously a true interpretation. But as I started reading for my work, and as I started thinking about it, I mean, it's the thought process that went into this book in a way had already begun with my PhD writing, I guess, all those years ago, because I was constantly dealing with questions of imagination and landscape. So when I started thinking more deeply about the immobility of rocks, or the silence of rocks, or the inertness of rocks and mountains, I realized that this is of course this is a wrong, well, not a wrong, but it's an incorrect or definitely an incomplete understanding. There is nothing in the world that doesn't change. Everything, we ourselves are changing, both internally at the cellular level and externally. And the same is with mountains, the same is with every single entity, man-made or not, because of the various invisible forces as well, geological, cosmological, all those kind of things that are acting. And this holds very much true for the Himalayas, and for that matter for any landform on Earth. That's why the very first poem that I wrote, I wanted to think about mountains as just in terms of their formation, in terms of their making. Like I'm very attracted by the fluidity of things. Of course, stability is a very important concept, but I think that even when you are the most stable and you are the most silent, you're still breathing. So in a way, you are never quite still. The breathing is essentially, it's the least and the biggest unit of movement for our existence, right? And the same is with the mountains as well. So to think about mountains and to think about them as in fluid terms rather than solid terms completely sort of changed my understanding of how to treat a landscape. Basically, the landscape became much more alive for me. And as an anthropologist and archaeologist, you would have, of course, read a lot of the new academic turn in the humanities and the social sciences, which has been trying to give so many new theories of vitalisms. In layman's term, that would be that, that would mean that for a very long time in human history, at least from a Western perspective, we have been dealing with humans as the most sentient people. But now we know that we are now living in a world of climate change and all those kind of important interventions, where we can never say that it is the human life only that matters. Nature, a lot of nature writing and landscape writing is about thinking about how an animal thinks or how a tree thinks, and there are hundreds and hundreds of books on just with these titles: The Secret Life of a Tree or The Secret Life of an Animal. But with rocks or stones, I think there is another level of silence. So when it comes to an animal or a plant or basically an organism that is already alive, you would still think about it in sentient terms, obviously, because it is breathing, it is walking, and it is in a continuous process. We don't think about stones, and we don't think about something like stones or land in terms of its aliveness. And yet, as one of my greatest inspirations and professors of anthropology, Tim Ingold, writes enormously over and over and over again in all of his work since the 1980s, that even a rock and even a stone is always under it's always under the influence of innumerable forces. I remember, as I was telling Saif as well, one of those great moments, literary like sort of turning points in my life happened when I read Robert Macfarlane's The Wild Places. And it's a gorgeous book in which the author takes a lot of journeys, and he goes on and out and just dwells on the life of inert things. And there's a passage in which he just picks up a stone from, I think, near a beach or near a riverbed, and he just holds it and tries to think about what it must have taken for the different constituents of the stones, the materials, the various kind of constituents, to come together and to become this sort of a stone, in which he not only includes the movement of the river or the tectonic shifts, etc., but also the geological and cosmological, like the greater forces of gravity and electromagnetic forces and all those things together. They come together in order to bring and make and shape that particular stone as a stone. So here I'm again reminded of what Ingold says. Ingold has edited a very beautiful book called Making and Growing, and we are conditioned to think about making as a human act and growing as a natural act. But his work very much sort of, it just, like Jackie was also trying to say, that collapse the distinctions between poetry and prose. It's the same with making and growing. If we are able to collapse the distinctions between making and growing, we will see how much both the, both like human making and natural growing actually owe to each other. And I think it was that sense of growth and movement and change and metamorphosis that all came together as I was thinking about writing this particular book. And now coming to the question on myths, I think myths, the glorious aspect of myths in today's world is, well, has always been, and particularly in the Indian subcontinent, is that you will go to another part of the country and you'll find a totally different myth with the same characters, right? So the Jains have a different version of the Mahabharata, and so many different versions of Mahabharata and Ramayana exist across the country, right? And it is so unfortunate that we are living in a particular political moment. And I have to say this very, very clearly and firmly, that we are living in a moment where the ruling dispensation is wanting us to believe in only one interpretation of what myth and mythology is, which completely goes against the grain of what mythology is supposed to be, right? So, like A.K. Ramanujan, the great folklorist, has that wonderful line in his beautiful essay, 300 Ramayanas, that no one in India ever reads the Mahabharata or the Ramayana for the first time, because it is already always there. So you don't read it, you already, imbibe it. So I think I wanted to honor and just work through this sense of myth. And nowhere am I claiming that, only this thing happened, or this is how myths should be viewed. Many people say there are 51 Shakti Peeths, other people say there are 108 Shakti Peeths. I have an entire poem on Shakti Peeths as well, So to fight over that sort of, detail, and to have all these rights and all this sort of political configuration, all these kind of things, it's so unfortunate, because it just, it really saps it away of the actual potential that myths have. So I think Yeah, when myths and Himalayas always go and together, simply because the Himalayas have since time immemorials been thought of as abodes of gods. You live in the Kullu Valley, you know this very well, that you reach a summit and there'll be a Jogini or a Devta right at the very top, right? So it's literally that the top will always be the point. No one has climbed the Kailash, because you cannot climb the Kailash. Kailash is supposed to be sacred, right? And if you do climb the Kailash, it will bring catastrophe. And also all those kind of, so there is a certain way in which myths do bring a sense of reverence, and also but also a sense of protection, and also a sense of enablement. That's not a word, but there's an enabling and a politically well, progressive way as well in which myths can be used. One of my favorite professors from Delhi University, who never taught me, but I've read her books, Giti Chandra is also on this discussion. She, according to me, is the best fantasy writer from India, and she has written these 3 wonderful books, children's young adult books, called the Guardian series. And all her so she used to teach English at St. Stephen's College, and now she's in Iceland. And all her books are just filled and inspired by the most creative way you can think about. Hi, Gite, so nice to see you here. And it's and I would encourage everyone just to read it and to think about myths in a very, very contemporary fashion, where you retain that sense of holiness, religiosity, sacredness, everything, and yet are able to work with it. I think I was inspired by her. I was inspired by Jackie. I was inspired by, obviously, my childhood hearings and all those kind of things. And I was inspired by the visual culture of myths as well. All those things were always there. And I just wanted to find some sort of a narrative. I think the biggest quality of myths, and for that matter, landscape, is the fact that they are amenable to storytelling. The moment you are able to translate something into story, it becomes an alive thing, whether it is a rock or a myth or whatever. And to end this answer, I would say that I haven't read out the 10 pages of introduction, and it was at very, very late that I decided to write an introduction for the book. And I was sitting with a close friend, and he said, so how will you fight off this, if you're given this criticism, that how can you talk about myths in today's age, particularly when so much political horror is happening only around myths and religiosity. So therefore I had to write that one introduction just to make my political stance clear about myths. And I therefore write in my introduction as well, I do not at all believe in one creator or one god. I definitely don't. I'm very much compelled by geology and science, but that doesn't mean that because I don't believe in one god, that I don't believe in prayers. The realm of prayer, the realm of worship, the realm of mythology is a very different realm, and even atheists pray for that matter. So I think we really need to keep alive the inherent diversity, complexity, and the contradictions that are inherent in our cultures of, particularly the cultures of mythology. If we do away with those contradictions, then obviously there's going to be there's going to be much bloodshed as is happening across the country.
And I think that's the reason I liked your the way you expressed your myths with that geological framework of creation, destruction. And I think those are the basic principles of the cosmos, and how myths have kind of emerged, in that kind of landscape. So I really liked the way you expressed it. I liked the way you talked about it, that was
Thank you.
Very, very, very beautifully done.
Thanks, Sonali. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you mentioned, sacredness and holiness and religiosity. So I have a question actually related to this. And I've been thinking that, and you've written a lot in your book on nature and say divinity or spirituality or the sacred space, reverence, as you just said. In practice, do we actually treat our mountains as sacred? I mean, the brutal, the way in which we treat them. Or let me just turn this question on its head and ask you the converse question. When we treat something as so sacred, like for instance, the Devis, who are representations of women, after all, do we then run the risk of negating our responsibilities towards those things?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're very right. I remember one of my first, first lectures from my bachelor's, and one of my very politically fierce teachers, she said that in India, either you are, if you're a woman, so you'll either be exalted and made a devi, or if you are supposed to be rubbished, you will be rubbished as a prostitute. So there is no sort of a middle ground. And it was a very big sort of a statement, which I encountered for the first time back then in 2005, and I had no idea about political thinking or emancipatory politics or all the things that we are now discussing, right? So I would agree with you that yes, we often use these sort of garbs, these sort of reverential behaviors or dispositions in order to just brush the actual practice or the everyday practice of how we respect another human being under the carpet. It happens all everywhere, and it especially happens in our society on an everyday basis. There is no doubt about that. In fact, I mean, coming to the goddess question and all, I mean, that's why I'm quite appreciative of works that have been able to shed some sort of critical socio-political light on the idea of contradiction. So one wonderful book I've just read passages by Upinder Singh, the great historian, has just come out on ancient India and its contradictions, and it tries to deal with exactly this thing. How do you understand, on one hand, the veneration and the great, the respect accorded to women, and then how do you understand that in the same era you have things like various scriptures and all that are also discriminating against. And the other is, of course, Amartya Sen and Gendre's book, India, An Uncertain Glory, India and Its Contradictions, which also tries to think about the way of contradiction. So I'm completely with you in terms of, how contradictory, and probably if, in that sense, it might be some sort of a double standard as well, that we are all participating in at various scales or at various levels. So I think that here then there are a couple of things. I would very much say that yes, people living in Himachal or people from Himachal or the Himalayas, other parts of the Himalayas as well, living there or in other parts, they definitely have this certain sense of absolute sort of love for the mountains. And in one of my favorite Indian author is Anuradha Roy, and her beautiful book, The Folded Earth, has this lovely lines which says that anyone, hill people born anyone, hill people, if they are taken anywhere else, they will always feel a certain kind of an alienation, even if they are not born there. And she's basically speaking for me, because I was not born in the Himalayas, I was born in UP. And so it's, I think that we very much need to appreciate that level of reverence, no matter how romanticized that is. I mean, I'm not that much against romanticization, but yes, I think over and over we really have to keep questioning ourselves, that what are we doing with that romanticization? Like, what are we doing with that sort of reverence? Is it just meant to poeticize? And that's why I'm not very compelled by arguments, can poets change the world or can writers change? Obviously they can change the world, but I think writers and poets form just a part of, I mean, there are different ways to change the world as well. And I think everyone in every profession has the ability to change the world in that manner, because essentially we are all living in a particular landscape. So I think that there is yes, in practice there is definitely a dearth of it, but I also feel, I mean, I'm very, very critical, obviously, of public society, of general everyday public, which is dirting and defacing the Himalayas. You can't imagine what Shimla has now become, or you can imagine if you have been there, the four laning, and it's just complete chaos and collapse. And one day the city will fall down. I mean, for all our hopes and all, it's a very, very pessimistic scenario that is there in Shimla and in other parts of the country, whether it is Darjeeling or Nepal or whatever. So yes, but here then the issue of power politics comes in. I mean, there are wonderful crusaders as well. I have my friends, you have your friends, who have been fighting for years and decades to bring in legislative changes and to warn people of that, these destructive things will happen in the Himalayas. But it once it becomes a question of political power, and it becomes a question of scale, and if the powers that be are hell-bent on destroying the mountains, or are hell-bent for that matter on destroying any other part of the landscape, it's very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is very, very, very difficult to stop it. And I think all of us know what happens to various petitions and various campaigns and all. Those are important. One needs to participate in them and all those things are very, very important. But the four-laning still happened in Shimla. There were massive protests, there were massive surveys and all. So I think we therefore need to a little bit sort of also sieve the political dispensation and the ordinary public, no matter how much swayed they are, in order to see how different people are practicing at different levels and different scales. Yeah.
There is a great demand for your ma to sing.
Oh God.
Why not? अगर वो हैं तो भाई हमारी तरफ से उनको दरखास्त कीजिए कि
I'm not sure if she'll ma batao. I know she's there, but I wonder if she would like to sing or not. At least you can say hello. Please come on screen. I wonder if she's shy. Yeah. Oh dear, I am not sure. Where is she?
We'll wait for her to come.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Yeah, whenever she's there, please let her know that.
Yeah, here she is. Yeah.
Have an active session.
Yeah, here she is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ma, you have to
let me
unmute yourself. Yeah. Sorry, there are crackers and firecrackers all bursting. So it's
yeah, that's exactly how we treat nature.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, here she is, ma. Mama is there. Yeah.
But congratulations, madam, and we are all waiting for you to sing and know from where this inspiration comes.
Oh my God! Actually, it's Siddharth always plays piano with me, so I don't know if I can sing without that.
Sing one or two lines at least, if you want to. Yeah.
हाँ भाई 2 लाइन तो सुना दीजिए हमें.
Okay, so since it's all about Himalayas and I belong to Dharamshala, Kangra, so I'll be singing 2 lines. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
ठंडी ठंडी हवा चल दे कि चुल दे चिला दे डालू हो चुल दे चिला दे डालू कि जीना कांगड़े दा हो जीना कांगड़े दा. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Wonderful.
I think a lot of questions about inspiration have been answered right here, practically.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you,
started.
Raman.
Yeah, so that started with the mother's touch, and of course your beautiful voice. And I feel, like what you were talking about, the narratives and oral kind of oral narratives in the Himalayas. And you were just talking about your inspiration with Tim Ingold. And I feel that, all these sacred places that we call sacred, I think the one good thing that they've been doing, of course, preservation of myths, those storytelling with the mountains as the backdrop, but also, they're like these little kingdoms where the environment is protected around the Devta or the Devi. These little isolated, like kind of islands within the urban thing that is happening, the bad, building construction activity, but within these places, these isolated areas where the Devi and the Devtas, you cannot cut the trees in their domain. You're protecting, nature, so that in a little way, it is still there, at least some grace for the Himalayas.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right about that. There is that, but again, I mean, why I'm always so insistent upon the questions of scale is because we are living in the time of climate change. I mean, it's just it does become the question of scale as well. I mean, in order for these strategies to be effective as well, I think there needs to be much more of much more of. Can you just excuse me for a moment? Ma, can you switch off can you unmute can you mute yourself? Thank you. So yeah, I think it's a just mute yourself as well, Lama. You have not muted yourself. Yeah, need to wait. Go. There's a. Yeah. So I think there is a. Yeah, so there are wonderful things happening, and of course there's a lot of work that has been written on sacred landscapes and all. But I'm not sure as to what extent that is like will that be successful, particularly since almost every government that comes, regardless of the political parties and all, they're constantly changing their the rules of how much green landscape is supposed to remain, or etc etc. So I wonder at what point these little changes that Sonali is talking about become become more than, say, symbolic changes. So while I appreciate them, I'm not quite sure how much hope can one attach to. I really want that. I really hope that I'm wrong in being so pessimistic. But given the just absolute rampage, and given the absolute devastation that has been taking place in the Himalayas, it's very important that we bring in some extremely strict laws about preservation and just stick to them, which unfortunately I don't quite see happening. So yeah, that's the.
In the Kulu Valley, we have a huge amount of protection to the forests in the areas where so like right now, like even the local people can't go to the forest to collect wood for the winter and stuff like this because the government has put a lot of.
Great. Well, I'm very happy to hear that. And hello.
Hey.
Let me introduce Dave. Like he's into organic farming in the Himalayas, a very dear friend, and he's right now in Sanj Valley, right, Dave?
Yeah. Yes, I am. So in the the normal Kulu Valley, there's a lot of too many apple trees, and the farms have all changed. So we're trying to find like organic spaces to change valley and in the middle of the Great Himalayan Wildlife Park.
I think your voice is cutting, Dave.
So like right now, I'm in the Great Himalayan National Park, and over here, nature is like #1. I mean, like there's so many checkpoints and stuff to like save the forests, and it's amazing actually in a way.
I know. Well, I've grown up in the shadow of Great Himalayan National Park.
Yeah, your father. You should tell everybody about your father, Siddharth.
My father was a director there, so and he's written a book as well. I mean, I'm not contesting that there are places like the Great Himalayan National Park or other beautiful terrain, for that matter. Even now in the outskirts of Shimla, there are some very beautiful spots and all. I just feel, I think it is high time that we try to do a sort of a large scale survey, and which is not only quantitative survey but also qualitative, in terms of just trying to think about at what level and in what various little everyday ways are these different practices, Himalayan practices of conservation, impacting the people. Because at least on the face of it, as much as I appreciate all of these ventures, I mean, in the last, you have seen this, Sonali, as well. When I grew up in the Kulu Valley to now, it's just the face of the valley, the main valley, has totally changed. I was aghast to see the kind of constructions that have been taking place, just like in Shimla, just like in Darjeeling and all, So that really worries me, and I'm not quite sure if we'll have ever a policy and all, particularly with the 4-laning of the Kulu of the Shimla highway and all. It's the mountains are all barren and so many landslides. I mean, this year particularly, we have had the most shocking visuals. You must have seen them as well. Just entire faces and flanks of mountains just dropping away as if it's nothing, So that is something that we have. Yes, we must definitely, obviously, we must take inspiration from projects like the Great Himalayan National Park and from other conservation projects as well. But I think all of this needs to be thought of in more collective terms, and more political, creative ways need to be thought about as to what to do about all of this thing.
So the question of changing attitudes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so let me ask you, since we are talking about a book and talking about poetry, etc., and I just heard you say that you're not a great believer in the advocacy of literature being a social, an instrument of social change. But how far do you think literature such as the one produced by you has in the past succeeded in changing attitudes?
See, so what I wanted to say when I made that particular story, I was reminding of, I was reading Shimasini on a couple of days ago, and he too had this, I wonder if I have the quotation somewhere here, but he had this, wonderful statement that don't expect poets to do all the kind of jobs that, say, what Shelley was expecting, that they are the moral keepers, etc., etc. And this is Heaney. These are, I'm paraphrasing Heaney, but he says that poets should be free to do whatever they want to do, and but for for us, or for anyone to appropriate them for our agendas and all, he doesn't feel that that is entirely correct. So some people would have disagreements with me. What I was trying to say was that it's not only literature, as in you need to constantly keep pushing your boundaries. It's not that, oh, you wrote one book and things are you expect things to change. Of course, a book.
No, my question is a little different. I'm asking you as you are a literature practitioner, you have a PhD in literature.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you as a per se question: has literature succeeded in any way in changing attitudes related to sustainable development and environment? That is my question. Not your writing.
Yeah. Okay.
Generally, has it? Yeah.
No, absolutely. Of course. I mean, that's why I quoted Robert's work and Jackie Morris's work. I mean, it is undoubtedly one of the great success stories of our modern literary establishment, what Robert and Jackie have been able to do. And specific, and I'm not saying this because she's sitting here. I mean, this has been the most just the most invigorating. The Lost Words project has been the most invigorating kind of a project or an advancement in terms of what literature can do. So Robert wrote his work in 2015, Landmarks. Jackie read it, then Jackie contacted him, if I'm correct, Jackie, right? And then they came together to produce a children's book. And then there were campaigns within the UK to buy that one particular book, which is The Lost Words. You know how successful it has sold. Over 100,000 copies in the UK. It's all over the world itself, and it has led to lots and lots of success. And Landmarks would also tell you this. There are lots of instances in which people conserving the local dialects or the local language associated with landscape, which is what Robert's work is all about, have been able to create a certain sort of a creative discourse in order to save. I think Landmarks, the 2015 book by McFarlane, it starts with one huge success stories in which people in the UK, in some part, were able to make a petition on, that this land which you are trying to kill or which you are trying to usurp, the authorities, it's not a barren land. And then you come together to create a certain vocabulary. Then I have my friend Yuvan Aves, whom I have never met and who was introduced to me by Robert and Jackie when I joined Instagram. He is, according to me, the best Indian nature writer currently, and he's on Instagram at a naturalist's column, and he has been doing the most phenomenal work. I mean, Robert has been singing his praises for a very long time, and I am astonished that at the age of 25, what not he has been able to do, just in terms of being very precise and poetic with your language, and language regarding natural observations. So not only has he brought out a book under the name A Naturalist's Column, I think he's practicing his ideas of attentiveness and his ideas of care and love and everything that he seeks through nature in his school as well. I think he teaches in one of the Krishnamurti schools in Tamil Nadu. So his is a very, very brilliant example of how a literary bent of mind has been able, and now he has been conducting his, I think, the first person in Chennai's history who's been able to just make these innumerable, almost institutionalize these innumerable nature walks around Chennai in a very concerted manner. And it's not that you're just going for a walk and observing and talking about it. There are very many creative methodologies that Yuvan has been able to bring together through all formats. So for instance, whether it is, I don't know, whether it is poetry or creativity or art, etc., etc. So there are lots and lots of there are lots of, I think, examples in which literature has been able to. I think Ashish Kothari and Asim Srivastav in their brilliant, again, a very important book on churning the earth, also talk a lot about some very good success stories in which this love for language and literature have been able to sort of permeate literature, have been able to permeate the larger societal consciousness. And of course, the greatest example of preservation, I mean, I do not know what will happen with this, but the great linguist G.N. Devi's great project on the People's Linguistic Survey of India, which has been able to bring, quite like Macfarlane and Jackie's work, which has been able to create this volumes and volumes of dialects which we didn't even know existed within the country. So I think that's the first step, and now it is upon other people as well to be as creative as possible around those texts. So I think, as Robert also says this often, that the 800 words of poetry that he wrote for Jackie's book, those brought him much more acclaim and fame as a writer than his own books, which I don't quite believe, but it's true. Like as a children's, if you focus on a particular category of children and young adult who constitute such a huge demography of the entire planet, if you are able to be creative around that, you will definitely be able to bring change.
Yeah. There's a comment here. I don't know who it is from because it just says Galaxy A8. But I would ask you to comment on this. This viewer is saying, I think books reach people who are already, it's a very important thing. I think books reach people who are already in the sensitive space.
Yeah.
We gravitate to books that are in sync with our predisposition. They don't reach people that really need to be influenced by our writings.
And Saif, I actually was thinking on those lines, and I wanted to actually put this question, and I think we can take these two comments together, Siddharth. So I wanted to narrate, like, we're talking about literary attitudes, and of course it goes to people who are able to kind of be in that world where they have access to it and they are predisposed and being sensitive to all of this. But the disenfranchised who don't have a voice, I live in a village, and when I talk to villagers and I tell them, why are you making these concrete homes and all of that, they will say, we don't think, we don't like cartoony architecture. It's our heritage, it's our tradition, but we don't have the means to do it. I went to this village 20 years later. I used to hike and I used to spend my time. I had home away from home. I had posted that thing to you as well, Siddharth, where I narrate that whole experience of being in that, meeting those people after 20 years. And what I saw was totally changed. The mountain top where Shaligram, which you can see from Shimla, from the ridge, that stays the way it was, but everything around it has changed.
Exactly.
So for me, my memories were rooted onto what I had experienced, and now it was not there anymore, and it was really, really sad. But the people were there, their love was there. And when I ask them these questions, they talk about belongingness and identity. There's this mainstream push to be modern, to be with the crowd, be there. And then your own kind of culture, or what the small places you belong to, if you continue that way, you do not make that journey towards that benchmark, that benchmark in our minds. So we really, like, what do we do for the locals who are not educated in that realm of literature? What do you think is the solution for that? And of course, please do comment on Galaxy's comment.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for your comments, Saif and Sonali, and whosoever is there under the Galaxy name. For here, a couple of things. First of all, we need to, I think, I know you are saying it in the earnest and all, but first of all, we need to, I think, just stop thinking about locals as illiterate. If there are natives and if they are locals, then obviously they are not illiterate. I know that they have not had their formings. Many of them have not had their formings.
When I mean illiterate, I mean illiterate in the
moderns.
In that poetic thing where they would not read that kind of literature.
I know. I completely get it, and I think we're on the same page here. That's so why I'm I constantly focus on and bring Yuvan's and Jackie's and Robert's works here, is that, well, Robert took it upon himself to collect all of these dialects and all from different rural parts of Britain and as well. And it's not necessary that everyone there either is reading, even though they know the English language, right? I think what we can be doing, and that's what I think Yuvan has also been doing as well, that we don't necessarily just say and tell them that, look, here is a book, read it, and you will change your mind. That's not going to happen. It never happens. I think we really need to, first of all, understand the culture of public reading within the country, which is absolutely abysmal. It's not that people don't read here, but in the ways which, let's look at the capital as well. I mean, in the ways in which we don't necessarily have a public discourse around libraries and all is absolutely shocking. One of the pleasures for me just to be in the UK was just to go in the British Library and to spend the entire day there for months and years together, just reading and reading and reading. Why? Because there is a certain institutionalization of knowledge in the most enabling of fashion. When I started my research on Shimla, and I wanted, this is long time back, 10 years back, and then there were different, of course, authorities and all in all the departments. And I clearly remember I wanted to access the archives, and archives are supposedly to be public in nature. But no matter what I did, no matter how many push and pulls and everything I applied, I was not allowed to visit the archives. Now, this is happening with educated people, people who have had degrees, people who have passed their examinations, administrative services, on all the blah, blah, blah. And they are the ones who are themselves trying to, not enable. So to even hope that a person who is, who does not fall in this category, the rural category, will automatically take on to these kind of new forms of is quite stupid. I mean, in many ways. I mean, it's not, well, stupid is a wrong term probably, but I don't think so that it tells upon us well to hope that they will do. Having said that, I will say that we need to we need to acknowledge and make them value their own sense of culture and their own traditions and all, and their own cultural legacies. So for instance, as going back to Saif's question as well about literature making a change and all, I think we really need to just broaden as broaden as possible the very meaning of literature for these people, for people in Himachal, where anyway written literature is very, very less. It was used for revenue settlements and land settlements and all. We don't have a written literary legacy, as for instance we have somewhere in other parts of the country, whether it's UP or Bengal or Gujarat or what's it, right? So, but we do have a huge sense of songs. We do have a huge sense of, and if we need to start treating that as equal to all great literature that exists. If we
which
don't,
it is,
which
I
it
think
is,
which it is.
Which is very much is, my mother who just sang this song, and it's a song just based in Kangra, and it talks about the beauty of Kangra. That's it, right? And if you look at the community of Kangra, which is usually a nomadic community, it has been coming during the summers. It comes from the mountains of Chamba down to Kangra, and then during the winters, and then during the summers it goes back, right? And there is a prolific song culture that has developed just through that particular exodus and happening for years, for centuries now. So there are songs which are singing the praises of Shiva, but it is a localized Shiva. And by localized Shiva, I mean that the shepherd is taking his herd from place to place, right? And it's every place and this is just as an example, every point that he's covering is also the point that he's hoping that is also the point that he is appropriating Shiva's mythology in. So for him, Shiva is literally walking with him as he's walking his shepherd, right? So I mean, so religion, geography, mythology, landscape, all of these come together. And I'm sure with your work, you have also seen within the Kulu Valley how amazing, what kind of rich sources and all are there.
I would like
so
to
I think we just need to find these creative ways, and I think involve more and more school children, activists, everyone, to make something more permanent. Like the other thing that I quite despise is that why do we start celebrating nature and wildlife only in the second week of October because it is a wildlife week? I mean, what is this nonsense? It is absolute bullshit. I'm sorry to use the word, but it is ridiculous. And how will we celebrate that? We'll celebrate that everything through the lens of competition. Who won the quiz competition? Who won the drawing competition? Who won the music competition? You know, and they will obviously be, and I have myself been, you know, in that privileged position of participating and winning and all. And now when I look back at it, I just feel aghast at the ways in which we try to promote these, you know, this one thing. We did a plantation campaign and then you just forget what the plantation was about. Shimla has innumerable forests which are just dying. Some plantation took place in some part of the hill and then it was forgotten. But of course, for that particular day, you had photographs with all the ministers and the bureaucrats, and then you just forgot. And then the plants obviously died.
So
This is problem is, I think this is what we need to sort of, you know, address more, rather than that people don't have a consciousness about nature or ecology.
I do have to, you know, bring in this point. I remember having given a lecture in a very good school in Manali, and I asked, and they were these high school students, and I asked them about the temples that I visited, you know, some of the names, and they had no clue about them. And that really
Yeah.
And then I said, you know, I have to start doing these heritage walks to kind of bring in the locals and talk to them. And there's this village, you know, not far from Nagar, where I was just hiking with my friends and I chanced upon this place, and the old man invited us to have tea. And when he understood what I do, he got out his little register where he had penned down a lot of idioms and muhavre. And he really wants me to publish them because they're the repository of Kulu idioms, talk about nature and all of that. And with that, there is this gentleman, and I would want everybody to be aware of that. His name is Joginder Rohila. He is an IT professional, worked everywhere, South America, Malaysia, and all of that. And he came back, belongs to Haryana, and he started this program of having 100 rural libraries, because when he was young, he didn't have access to a library. So it was his dream to have it. So we are the 75th library, the Himalayan Institute.
Oh, wonderful.
We got a lot of books in, you know, English and in Hindi. And of course, COVID has been an impediment into kind of achieving what I really wanted to achieve. But I have envisioned his institute being a hub for culture, where children of the village come, they engage in storytelling and do projects in painting and singing, and get sensitized to culture. So that's one way I thought of bringing in the sense of identity and belongingness, and not going on and latching yourself to what we think is modern. Modern can be traditional, it can be intangible, it can be rooting to your own heritage and being modern at the same time. So I do want to inculcate that when kids are young, and a few kids do come by and they kind of choose their books, and I've got these blogs and, you know, these stories that are all around the Himalayas. So I feel that at least it's a drop in the ocean, but then drops, you know, make the glass, you know, fill
absolutely
up.
no I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled that something like this is happening, and I mean, many congratulations that you have been able to make this kind of a difference between. I'm very aware how difficult it is to carry on these projects, but you know, I'll again I'm not playing the skeptic, or I'm not playing the pessimist here, but I would like to say here that as I was pointing out what happened with me when I wanted to access the archives of Shimla, which ultimately I had to access in the British Library in London, the same is true. It's not that people of, say, the Shimla region have not written these books on the proverbs of Shimla region or other parts of the Himalayas, right? But I'm I'm saying I'm aghast by the way in which you know, these things they get published. One local newspaper will carry out the inauguration news and everything, release news and everything, right? And then most people within Shimla don't even know where is the Department of Language, Art and Culture. It's as simple as that. They do not know this. I know one of my, you know, very wonderful well-wishers who has worked in the department. She's listening to this as well, and she's well aware of these problems. So, you know, that. And there have been wonderful people who have been able, you know, constantly on their heels, have been able to make festivals and, you know, do all these kind of things. But you know, even the one or two main popular bookshops of Shimla do not host those books that have been published under the aegis of the Department of Language and Art and Culture, which talk about exactly the thing that you are trying to say, the proverbs of Himachal Pradesh and all, you know, because they, you know, it's not just that you write the book. I think the success story of Jackie and Roberts and Yuban's as well, tells us much more than just how beautiful a book it is. It is a lot to do with media. It's a lot to do with funding. It's a lot to do with communication networks. It's a lot to do with education networks. You know, all of those things basically come together in order to make something visible. So that is what I think. I mean, it's at that level of change. So I think one of the lovely things that I really appreciate about your institute, HICS, CHS, is simply that you have been so utterly just on your heels and just doing lectures after lectures every single Sunday since the last 2 years. I mean, it's phenomenal. No one does this. I mean, I do not know any other institution which does this, or there might be one or two of them, but this sort of, this utter passion with which you have been bringing people from all over the world in order to make, and that's what would lead to a certain sort of a discourse. So this is what I'm trying to talk about, these various sort of energies that come together. And as for answering the question, that galaxy guy question, yes, I think, I mean, yes and no. Yes, of course, people who would be sensitive, they would obviously be, better adept at imbibing those influences. But see, the one difference that I would like to make between, say, the success of the Lost Rocks the Lost Words project in the UK and something similar happening here is that it is still by and large a single language country. So you still have English as the medium of communication, of relationships, of everyday speaking, of family speaking, of friendships, of everything, right? Here, there are lots and lots of different layers, which actually we should use as our, as our opportunity rather than a challenge. So here, if, a book in English is getting published, there are several other things that immediately sort of open up. Will it reach a non-English speaking audience? Why should a non-English speaking audience be interested in it? Why should a non-social media audience be interested in it? How might we translate those books? Do we have enough funding to create some sort of, an endeavor or a campaign around it? And so on and so forth. So I think these local particularities, they play a very, very significant role in just, creating this sort of appeal of around a particular project. I mean, today my article, which came out in the Hindu on the Lost Rocks, was also just a very tiny attempt for just to bring this amazing global arts project out in a more sort of in a more national space. And it hasn't been easy, I must say. I submitted this article, I think 2 months ago or something like that. But as it happens with national media and all, of course, there are lots and lots of articles in the pipeline, and it takes a very long time to get published. I'm delighted that it got published today because of the book talk as well. But I'm just saying that these are the the little things. You have to be active on Instagram. You have to be active, and you have to just think about it. The final point that I want to make here is that we have been talking a lot about language, literature, and nature, but we have to talk and create a discourse around architecture. It is so shocking that in our country, we just do not have a public discourse around architecture. It is, I mean, it boggles me like anything. So while, of course, we have had such great architects like B.V. Doshi Saab and Charles Correa and many other people. I know that there are people in Nagar and Himalaya, near your place, Rahul Bhushan, who is doing wonderful work. I know there's Madhvi, who's sitting and staring at me here, whose beautiful abode in Shimla is just it's just an architectural marvel. It's an old British bungalow which has been conserved through Himalayan techniques of building. So these bits and pieces are there. But in a general sense, we do not have a contemporary architectural discourse. And I won't say much on this. If anyone wants to read about the horror that urban development and architecture has gone through post 1947, one just has to read Gautam Bhatia's brilliant books on India, whether it is Delirious City or whatsoever. It's very, very shocking that we have still not been able to think about architecture in a general sense as a humanities subject. We still think of it as an engineering subject. We still think of it as a very mechanical subject. And the difference, for me, the one big shocking difference, initial difference came when I went 10 years ago for a particular conference in the UK. And I just saw, the label was there, and it said Department of Architecture, Faculty of Humanities. I have never seen that anywhere in the country. I'm sure there must be some good institutions, but it just sort of, bowled me away that humanity, and even at Cambridge, the Faculty of Architecture is in association with Faculty of Fine Arts. It just speaks volumes about how you perceive a science, or which is very much an engineering science, in an artistic and a humanistic way as well. So I think all of these things are very, very important to come together in order to make any sort of visible and sustainable change.
And I think, Siddharth, because the whole forum, like, it's a very interdisciplinary forum. We have architects and geologists and, people from very different streams come here and talk. And I think the whole idea to have this platform was for that interdisciplinary dialogue, rather than just being in your own wells and not knowing what's happening in the other world. And yes, architecture is so much, when I talk about architecture, people think, oh, I'm an archaeologist. How can I talk about architecture? But that's what we dig. That's materiality for us. And it's very important to have a dialogue. There are places in the Kulu Valley, for example, that were built by the British. Then they were occupied by Tibetan Khampas in a Hindu village. And that engagement with material culture and the place you dwell in, and what a space means, it becomes so important when you talk about subjects like sociology, archaeology, anthropology, and all of that. And having said that, I think in small parts, bits and pieces of the Himalayas, change is happening. So you spoke about Rahul Bhushan. He's doing amazing work. And there's so many people in Shimla, in Kulu Valley. And of course, I wanted to bring this to attention that come January, I'm starting an intangible cultural heritage series where, when you talk about literate and, people who are not in that mainstream kind of dialogue, people of the village, they will be coming at the Institute and talking about their engagement with culture, with their heritage and their myths.
Fabulous.
And, have what do you say, a chai pe charcha, like more with, like, I'm saying that, like that kind
चाय
of.
पे चर्चा मत करवाइएगा, उससे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम हो रही है.
My chai ki charcha is, I'm trying to point, Saif, that my chai ki charcha is going to be a little different where people,
I think there are a couple of people who want to ask.
I just wanted to make a point, if I'm allowed to.
Yes, please.
Siddharth, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay. As a teacher, I can only give in this input that I come from these 3 states, Himachal, Uttarakhand, and Jammu and Kashmir. And I've been teaching in schools there right from the first standard till the 12th. We used to go for long nature walks. My sister still in Kullu took her children to Bijli Mahadev. I take them here near Aravali Hills. So leave aside this very erudite company and all, where we are talking about books and all. Why can't we start from a 4 to 6 to 10 to 70-year-old children who can be made to go with teachers to these places? Aravali Hills ho gaye, Bijli Mahadev Temple, Chamba, Bharmor. I belong to these states, which are basically only hill states. Unfortunately, I'm in Gurgaon now, but I miss my mountains. If we take them right from the beginning, an education department can play a big role here to let them see the landscapes for themselves, to know all the little stories behind them, so that they grow up with this culture. And I want to just share one little thing. When I was in Kishtwar many years back, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I could hear from my right ear Hanuman Chalisa, and from the other ear in the mosque, the azan being played. It was such a wonderful experience. You could see the hills. They were full of snow. You could visualize Allah, you could visualize your Shiv, you could visualize any god. I have never experienced this in my entire life. Until today, Kishtwar and Bhadrawa are the places where you do not have any conflict vis-a-vis the communities and all. So I really love that place. So I just wanted to share this little thing with you, and that's all. And of course, I belong basically to Chamba, Bharmor, which is called the Devbhumi. And then of course, all these hills, this entire Himalayan belt. And therefore, I just wanted to share, why can't we do this with our toddlers, 4 and 6 years old? So I just wanted to tell you this. And I would also like to know, Saif, where are you from, J&K?
नहीं, not at all. मैं तो साहब मैं दिल्ली वाला हूँ. दिल्ली जो एक शहर था, आलम में इंतखाब हम रहने वाले हैं उसी उजड़े दयार की.
I'm from JNK, half from Himachal, half from JNK.
Okay, okay.
Well,
And Himachal has
I
got the entire forest belt in the year 1966. Punjab and Haryana were just left with little chunks of this cotton growing thing. Himachal got everything. And Dalhousie, which is a beautiful place, it is being so badly neglected by the authorities. Why can't the children, they've opened DPS school, they've opened this, that, so many schools, institutions. They're only concerned with the technical knowledge. Computers in a class, 4 साल का बच्चा computer के आगे, 5 साल का, oh, they are great. But they have not seen what's around them. So why can't we take them to these places?
Mrs. Wazir, may I interject out here? The problem when you're talking about taking kids to the Aravallis, the major areas in the Aravallis, which were famous for the mother trees, for the Indian frankincense, are now landfills. So those mother trees don't exist anymore.
Yes, I'm talking of 30 years back.
Well, I don't remember 30 years back.
When we used to take them, and now I really like it. Like
But
Siddharth was
we're
saying.
talking about the issues, because
Yeah.
if your aspiration is marble and granite and a concrete structure, then a mud house and indigenous architecture means nothing. It's not aspirational. It's not something that gives you a little social uplift.
सही बात.
Okay?
And that's true.
So,
And that's true.
and the other problem is, when I talk to my community, I have a little group around my home. And the first thing that I did when I came to Simla was talk to them about not cutting the huge oak trees. Now I'm talking to my community about it. So on the sly, what do? They put poison at the roots of a ban ka ped,
Yes.
an oak
Yeah.
tree, and they kill it because they can't, they can't have me
Yeah,
coming
cut it,
down on
yeah.
them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
So while on one hand, I'm saying don't cut trees, you need a cabinet decision to cut a tree. The Kach Road above our home, the government has gone about widening it, and humongous oak trees have been cut down.
Yeah.
So when you go and talk to the municipal corporation about it and you say, listen, on one hand, you're saying smart city, green city, heritage city. And on the other hand, you're cutting these enormous 500- and 600-year-old oak trees. What are you doing? And as far as architectural integrity goes and maintaining architectural integrity, that they don't understand that. The only heritage for our government is the big buildings, say the Viceregal Lodge or Gorton Castle or the Christ Church or St. Michael's Cathedral. I'm talking just of Simla right now. I don't have any experience of any other place. I'm just talking about Simla. So they fail to understand that there is a heritage beyond that. The local house, the little something as small as the servants' quarters of the Cecil Hotel, which are very, very famous, very beautiful. Those they don't talk about at all. They don't talk about the little huts that were made in the lower bazaar, in the mandi, which of course now have been concretized. Nobody ever looks at the smaller structures, which are also part of the heritage of the city. And a tree is now deemed dirty. उसके पतझड़ होता है तो उससे गंध होती है. So a tree is not aspirational.
Yeah, I'll just interject here and I'll completely see. I mean, Madhvi is talking about quite a few years when this poisoning of the trees started. In my latest research trip to Shimla, which took place just 1 month ago, not even 1 month ago, listen. This is I've been interviewing hundreds and hundreds of citizens for my book. This is common knowledge, but of course, no one can write about this in informal ways. And every other person or Shimla lover at least tells that this devdar, they basically put phenyl and all at the base so that within some time the tree would rot, and then obviously you would get the permission to cut it. It is happening rampantly across, and I really don't know what is the solution, because you can't. I mean, how can you prevent anyone from going to any tree in the thick of the forest and pouring that that chemical which would destroy the tree. But that's a reality. It's incredibly sad, and I mean, I just don't know what to say about it. But thanks, Madhavi. Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Sonali, if I could just come in.
Sonali.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to take leave. I have another session with the Rangmanch Canada in 5 minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you very much, Siddharth. It was a great discussion. And thank you. And I hope somebody will ask you this question. If nobody does, please answer it at the end. What are you next working on?
Okay, great.
Bye-bye.
Fine.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks, Saif.
Thank you, Saif. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Let's have Vijay Lakshmi Bose. She had a question, and then we'll take Romel, and we are actually nearing almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to thank you for such a beautiful rendition.
Thank you,
and it gives a completely new spin on something that Shakespeare told us long ago, that yes, rocks do speak.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. I'm so glad.
I would like to refer to somebody who's very close to HICS, whose book called A River Sings should be out shortly, in about 2 weeks' time, Dr. Anjali Kapila.
Yeah, sure.
She talks about the women who live on the river, and the women are unlettered. And they sing about the trees, and they sing about the Ganga.
Yeah.
And they use very simple techniques like yodeling, ululating, to drive away people who cut trees because they think they're the spirits of the forest. So and she talks about these very simple things that can be done at no cost, provided women come together. But then she also talks about the loss of reverence. For instance, there's a cement pull across the small bridge across the river, and the grandmother, when she crosses it, takes off her sandals, and the granddaughter crosses it on her Nikes, because she doesn't believe she's crossing the mother, she's crossing a bridge. So the loss of sacredness is another thing she talks about. Yeah. And the third thing that she has done, which is exemplary, is that she's produced a compendium of songs called Gungunati Ganga for children. And IGNCA, and if we think government doesn't do things, yes, I'm not for any government or against any government, but IGNCA has produced 500 small copies of these books in Hindi and Garhwali. And this month, they're going to, when the schools open, each school child who goes to a government school in Garhwal will be given copies of Gungunati Ganga. And we'll be going and teaching them how to sing these songs. So these are small, very localized efforts. But what Dr. Kapila is trying to advocate in her book, because she's a communication specialist, is that these are small-ish efforts that make these big movements. And this is the poetry of the people, so to speak. So that's all I wanted to bring forward. I'm sure he'll speak about the river sings on this platform, and we can talk more about it. But thank you for the opportunity.
Siddharth, you're mute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you, ma'am. This is such wonderful news, and it's very much in line with the kind of political thought and activism that I would definitely promote myself, given the opportunity. So I would like to congratulate you and the writer and everyone involved with this project of making, like going into this thing and wholeheartedly and delving into this practice of educating. As you were speaking about Anjali Kapila's book, the other book that immediately came to my mind was Professor Kiran Narayan's book on, it's called Everyday Creativity. Kiran Narayan is a very famous anthropologist teaching in Australia, and her book called Everyday Creativity is basically deals with the songs that my mother was singing. So it's an anthropological study. It's one of the most gorgeous pieces of scholarly work, and I wouldn't use that adjective with the scholarly work, but it is stunning, where she tries to understand how these women who don't otherwise read or write basically engage in singing the songs of the goddesses and the gods, the Krishna and everyone in the Hindu pantheon, in order to fight off their the oppression of patriarchy within the fields of Kangra. So I think this book would very much go well along with what Anjali Kapila's book would also promises to do. So thank you so much for the opportunity, for just letting me know, and I look forward to reading.
And we will have a book talk relating to that soon, I think end of December, and we'll keep you posted. And also, bringing in all this transmission, because that's what my main theme, my research area is, cultural transmission, in terms of how these things get transmitted, how they get adapted, and how you can hear the emotions of people in these songs. And then harkening back to where we come from, Shruti, by word of mouth. And that's how
exactly. Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll take
I would just like to
from Romel.
Okay.
Fine.
Oh
yeah. You need to say something, Siddharth.
No. Please go ahead. I just wanted
want you to kind of read the last excerpt from your book. And does Aruna Mahajan have to say anything?
Yes.
I'll take two questions. Yeah.
Romel and Aruna, just
yes.
It's possible. Please do.
I just wanted to, compliment you, Siddharth, that you have really, the fluidity reminded me of reading, Puranas and all. So it has been too good. It's really very, very nice. I really compliment you for that. And now, second thing I just wanted to say about was myths we are talking about. Like you see, like cutting of this peepal tree. There is myth that you can't cut it, and you grow it is anywhere it is growing, like maybe from the crevice of a building, nobody will cut it. So these kind of myths are very helpful when it comes to things like this and all that. And next thing, I just want to say one more thing, like we are talking about children getting this education about plants and all, like what my father has been doing with us, and I did with my children and grandchildren. When we are sitting in the car traveling, just make them aware there is a tree growing here, name of the tree or something, and flowers and things like that, so that children develop a love for that. So this can start from our homes also. Not that we have to go for this thing. So as parents, we have to become educated enough to tell our children about our surroundings. So that will make them aware. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you so much for that comment. And I would like to add, because, oftentimes parents don't know the names of those trees and plants. So with my son, when I go for he's an 8-year-old, his name is Rudra. Whenever we go in the village, he has a lot of questions. So of course, technology helps in a good way sometimes. So please do download. It's for Android and iPhone users. There's this app called Picture This. This, and whenever you click a photograph of a plant or a tree, it kind of tells you what it is, where does it come from, and it kind of gives you a plethora of the range of that plant. And also, if it's afflicted with a disease, you can actually help them.
Fabulous.
It is just developing an interest of looking at the plants. And whenever they use like in Western places, we always use these paper tissues and all that, and every time they tear a paper, my grandchildren, I tell them, don't waste it, because it costs a tree to make it, and so many trees are cut to make it. So just to make them aware of it. So I think every day when we are doing it, so this is very important. Indeed. We can't avoid certain things, but still we can just tell them that this is wrong, kind of a thing.
Thank you, ma'am.
Otis has come out with another app, Plant Snap. So there are lots of, and they're free. Free.
So. I think the National Trust in England also has a similar app for identification of trees. It's quite.
Yes.
Romel has put up the hand. Romel. I think. Yeah.
Hi, Siddharth. I think it's too late in the session to ask this question.
No, it's fine. Please do.
And the outlook is very bad. India haven't made 100 runs in the last 7 wickets. We are in the 19th over. So the situation is grave. My questions and my observations are also not very, I find this difficult to understand. Okay, so let me, the question I'm going to ask you is about the creative aspect of writing poetry.
Yeah.
I will preface it with what you have yourself said. So this project, the duration of the project was about 2 months. Prior to that, you never wrote poetry. You wrote very few lines.
Yeah.
You had a commission to write. 2 months were given, or 2 or 3 months were given. You wrote this poetry. I think you've done an excellent job.
Thank you.
The first and the second sections, the turn of phrase and stuff was like brilliant on occasions. You share something with T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, my professor used to say, was a very, very poor reader of his own poetry, and you outdid him actually. I say this.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry to be unflattering, but I say this because when you reach the third section, striations, I didn't see any poetry there. It was prose. It was pure prose. The one I can see a couple of reasons for this. When you recited a few Hindi lines, that was, they were very sweet to hear. English is not our native language. It will, probably never will be. So there is, I see that as one of the reasons. The second point is the poetic license is a term used by people who study literature to sanction a great amount of freedom to the poet to do whatever he wants to do. Now, when you read striations, and throughout your reading, it was a continuous reading, as if it was a prose reading. The lines were written in stanzas, and you never paid any attention to punctuation throughout. There were no pauses even between the lines, which you expect, of course, leaving aside poetic license. Okay. Now, these are my observations. I'm sorry to be a little unflattering, but it struck me really very hard. Now, I am also attempting a little bit of poetry on environmental issues.
Okay.
What I seek to understand here, and I once again reiterate, you did an excellent job, bringing in in ideation, in terms of ideation, the Shaligram and the way you describe. You had a complete. You started. It seems to me you started very heavily on the ideation part. And then you wove everything into poetry. I'm sorry to use this word, but when we reached the third, bit, everything seemed very contrived. What I want to understand, I mean, this is my observation. What I want to understand is, what was the creative? Can you describe the creative process in writing poetry here? Okay, within 2 months, how did you go about it?
Okay, fine. First of all, thank you. I mean, I'll try to answer as much as possible. First of all, thank you so much for being a patient listener, and I'm delighted that you found value in the first 2 poems and were critical. I take it on board. And probably I don't quite. As I said, I'm not a trained poet, so I'm not quite sure how to read poetry. And then. But I would also believe that every poet has a different way of reading out his or her poems as well. So there's nothing inherently like a rule book that would tell you how to read poems. Probably it was I must have been dozing off during the third poem. I don't know, but I'm sorry if it didn't strike as poetry. The third, all poems are quite dear to me because, well, the entire project for that matter is quite dear to me. I would, if I can. Just say something about the third poem is that it's true that it was more of a prose, but then there are hundreds and hundreds of writers who are writing prose poems. I mean, I'm not the first one who's doing something like this. And in fact, I wrote that poem because I wanted to just dwell on the idea of line, as a poetic concept. That's why it's called striations. And I think for me, the 2 most important books on lines are by Tim Ingold, the anthropologist, who has written these beautiful 2 glorious anthropological works on what line is. But I'm also concentrating on line simply because poetry is the art of the line in the most simple terms. Where do you break the line? Where do you move forward, etc., etc. And there is no, I think, so this is what I've learned, at least as a literary scholar, that there is no one rule which will tell you this is where you break the line. I have shown my poems to very well-established poets, and Many of them have won big awards and all. Just for the sake of experimentation, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Every person responded differently. All of them had won great recognition and all. So, it just sort of goes on to show that it is something which is very, very personal. And in that third poem, the Striations one, I also wanted to just literally bring and name certain places which I thought were found across the Himalayas. I mean, it's true that Striations, in a way, it looks more of a poem which is just sort of, sometimes it might feel as sort of name dropping, but I wanted that name dropping to happen simply because I wanted to make it a sort of a pan Himalayan thing. I started thinking from the Himachali terrain, but of course Himachal is not the only Himalayan state. There are so many other places as well. So I wanted to mention Singalila, I wanted to mention West Bengal, I wanted to mention Panchachuli, I wanted to mention all of these places as well. And I think the one way in which all of these came together was through the concept of line, and quite a few people have written online, so I won't go into that. So for me, I think derived that sense of poetry within that particular third poem, just through that concept of line. And I must also say that my the other authors who have been working, the other 42 writers who have been working on this project, so I'm not the only person to write a book on fossil. Mine is the 8th book on fossil in this entire collection. One another person from, I think, Australia, Polly Stanton, she's a wonderful nature writer, and she has written her entire meditation on fossil. Her interpretation of fossil is literally through lines. So the entire book in many ways is a homage to lines through the idea of trace. So she creates poetry just by talking about trace in a very evocative prose. So I think this is what I would like to say about the third poem. As far as the creative process is concerned, I'll just say that I just threw myself in those 2 months into as much research as possible. I like research. I mean, I have grown up as a scholar, so I can't ever discount it, even if it is for a very creative thing. And if you'll see, all the best fantasy writers, despite writing in the fantastical mode, first have to research a lot on how the real world is understood, whether it was Tolkien, whether it was Giti Chandra, who was attending here, whether it was anyone. Yeah. So I think it was a lot of research. I read a lot of travelogues, non-fiction books, history books on Himalayas. That one section in the third book on corals, where the corals make their lines as the earth makes the rotation, comes from I was inspired to write about that. It's just a fact, of course, but I thought that there's something quite poetic simply about the fact that when a coral is growing, it is able to form these lines within its own body as a mark of the rotations around the sun. So that just that bit of information was derived from this excellent book on Indian geology called Indica by Pranay Lal. This is possibly the best book on Indian geology to have come out in the recent years. Similarly, I came to know about Panchachuli, which is also referred to in that poem through my brother who had visited Panchachuli. So I think these were all I think a lot to do. I don't think so I'll be the right person to tell you how to write a good poem, because as I said, I don't think that I have the wherewithal to tell you, but I can just say that from my own experience, I think everything comes together. Your personal experiences, your scholarly experiences, the way you listen to something, the way you think about or think through certain forms or concepts. So when I say forms or concepts, I'm quite intrigued and pulled by ideas of, say, scale, movement, transformation, metamorphosis, materiality, all those kind of things, music, and inherent music to literature, but also just the practice of music. All of these things, they just come together. I must also say that if I come back to the same book, say after a few months or say after a year, I might decide that I wish I had written this particular poem in a different way. And that is also very, very natural. I see this happening with all writers, both established as well as new ones, who, if they revisit their books, they would like to change something. At the moment, thankfully, that has not happened, but I don't know. So I'm really not trying to cling to something that I've made as this is my best work, or this is not a good work, etc., etc. But I think it within the narrative arc that I was trying to create, and because the Striations poem also fits in the it's located in the Dev Bhumi section. I wanted to just pour in more and more examples as well. So I think very many influences come together. Probably you can, of course, people do have degrees in creative writing and masters and PhDs and all of that. I'm not sure how much useful they are because I've not done that. Many people find it very, very useful. Many people don't find it very, very useful. So there are and there are exceptionally established poets who have just trained themselves to become poet through a formal scholarly education. But there are equal number of poets who have never ever went to university to learn the art of poetry, or for that matter, to learn the art of novel writing, you know. So I really feel that writing is an utterly subjective process. I just feel that the more you can, the idea of practice is very important in it. Just that you just keep honing and honing and honing. Probably, say, if I had more than 2 months between, say, if I had 4 months, probably I would have written a different kind of poet or poem, you know. Or if I had 6 months, I would have written something else. So who knows there? And so therefore the idea of time is really time constraint, space constraint. What are the kind of voices, noises, colors, shapes, textures, patterns? All of these, I think, go into the making of any kind of, you know, poetry, or for that matter, any kind of creative work. So I'm sorry, I'm not offering you a formula or anything, but this is my take on how
that's
I write.
very enlightening. There's just one thing I'd like to ask. So
Okay.
the moment you put pen to paper, how many revisions did these poems
Oh,
go
many. Oh my God, many. I think there was just, I was furiously just cutting and scratching and throwing away everything, you know. I did not count, because after I think 10-12 drafts, I just lost count of it as well, because I just had to write. So yeah, one thing I can tell you in concrete terms is that this might sound weird, but this is how I work. I like writing both on computer, but also with hands. So I like to maintain a balance with both the things. I'm not someone who is only writing on computer or only writing with hands. The other thing is that I try, and this I did with my PhD as well. There is something, as many philosophers and psychologists have also argued, that handwriting has a greater capacity for memory, remembrance, than typing, and this has been proven scientifically as well. So I like that sort of long handwriting, and I usually like to write on an A4 piece of paper which does not have lines. For me, I mean, visually and aesthetic, I'm a photographer as well, so that visual sense of a blank space is very important. I don't like, my mother, on the other hand, she writes an opposite. She needs to have lines always, you know. So these are very subjective things. There is nothing right or wrong about it, but that's how I write. That I accumulate loads and loads of A4 paper. I write and then I type, and then I again write and again type. And I think 10-20 drafts went into just making something like this. So yeah, that would be my answer.
How are these books going to reach a
Romel?
wider audience?
Romel, can I interject?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
you know, we have gone over time, so we just need to wind up. And I would like to take one last question from SJ, if you don't mind. They have their hand raised. And after that, I would ask Siddharth to kind of read his last excerpt, and then we can kind of wind the session. Yes, SG, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shubhadeep.
Hi.
I'm an architect, actually.
Hello.
I'm based out of Delhi. Yeah, hi, am I audible?
Hi. Yes, you are.
Hi. Okay, hi, Siddharth. Actually, I sat through the entire session and we really enjoyed it. In fact, the first poem, I really loved it.
Thank
Okay, really loved it. Okay, I mean, now the thing is that, you know, boss, I'm an architect. I'm based out of Delhi, and you know, we're doing some projects in Himachal, and I really enjoy trekking and, you know, the mountains, etc. It's more like a romance with the mountains. Okay,
Yeah,
and of course, technically also, since we are you know, engaged there, so it is very exciting. Now, my only thing is that, you know, if you can, I mean, if you can ask somebody, or if you can yourself, you know, write it in Hindi, you know, the local language, which people can enjoy and relate, and, you know, actually add to the landscape which is there. And, you know, about talking about architecture, and, you know, being the most significant aspect of something which is visually, which connects you to the landscape. You know, we need intervention at the school level and at the local language, you know, just to sort of, you know, reinstill the you know, what we are talking about. I mean, it takes a long time to come up with a particular style, and it takes hardly any moment to sort of erase. And we have seen it in last 30, 40 years. The landscape of the mountains have completely changed, and that is very sad. So this is the only thing. So if you can translate it, it'll be very good.
Thank you.
Something, a genuine intervention.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I take it on board again, and I'm so happy that you made this point. My Hindi is not that. I love Hindi songs, and I've started reading Hindi literature for a long time, for some time now. But I think I will, I should ask someone who is very good in Hindi and English both to translate as well. I very much understand the point of this because, as I said, I'm a photographer and a curator as well. And so I've had lots of exhibitions both within India and the UK. And I have had in the two photographic exhibitions on Shimla and the Himalayas that I had at the Gaiety Theatre in Shimla. In the first exhibition, I learned there were lots and lots of people who came within the span of 5 days. But I learned that I need to curate all of my, writings in English into Hindi. The one thing that I'll disagree with the last person's point was that English is not our native language. I don't think so. That is true. English is very much our official. Of course, if you can't call it, it's a colonial language, and there's lots of debates on that. I don't feel that is true. I think if you have grown up within an English education system, if your family speaks both English and Hindi and all, so I don't see the point of not calling it a sort of a native language or maintaining that sort of a distinction. I think the beauty of India is that many people are sort of constantly talking about in multiple languages. So and I've never ever felt any kind of alienation with English, probably because of my because my mother was a teacher in English, and because of my this, and because my education was in English as well. So I don't want to venture into that debate with how Indian English is and how Indian something else is not. We have had so many language politics and debates. It's not, and I don't have time enough to delve into that. So one is that. The other thing is that I did, so in my first exhibition I understood the importance of and because I write a lot, the translating. So in the second exhibition I made it sure that all the subtitles that I had in English for my various photographs, they had to be translated into Hindi as well. So I do not know if it happened because of that, but the first exhibition was also for 5 days, and it drew around 4,500 people. The second exhibition was also for 5 days, and it drew 10,000 people. I wonder if it has something to do with language. So I wholly appreciate this importance of translating into different languages and of celebrating different vernaculars. Thank you.
Because that's where the mass is, I mean, to change the landscape, to intervene in the landscape, that's where the intervention happens. The local language is the intervention.
Totally. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. It was really good to hear you through. Thanks.
Thank you, Shubhadeep. And so I would ask Siddharth to kind of close the session, though we would love to go on and on, but with your excerpts. And before you do that, I do want to share that, like how Aruna ji was mentioning that all these things come young. And I feel my tryst with the mountains has helped my son kind of engage with the mountains so much. He's just woken up, he's coming in. He loves reading about rocks, collecting rocks and gemstones. And whenever I'm going on my trails, he's trying to, look at the texture, touch, he's trying to add meaning to what rocks and gemstones hold in his life. And when I got this book, he really liked the, title Fossil, and that sparked his interest. So I feel we need to keep doing that, because what we do, our children emulate us and people around us do. It strikes conversations, it strikes meaning, a sense of purpose. And I think Siddharth is doing just that almost 40 of us congregated here today to listen to him speak about the wondrous Himalayas, what it has to offer and what meaning it poses. And from a very emotional, physical and metaphorical sense, Siddharth puts into words of what he has experienced, and that is what we are all here for, the human experience. And Siddharth, over to you to wind up. And also one last announcement. Next week we have another session with Stephen Alter, author of many books from the Himalayas. Please join in next Sunday, again 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So we have a good lineup, and of course Siddharth Siddharth, you were the crown. So over to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, once again for this extraordinary opportunity and for so many questions and for listening to me patiently. It matters a great deal to any writer and definitely to a writer who is a first book writer. So I would never forget this wonderful, wonderful experience. I would like to now end with the final poem of the final of the book, and it's from the third part called Lineages. And so as I was saying at the very beginning, that this poem, it's a bit long poem, but I'll end it there. So I'll share my screen as well, and I just want to give some introduction. So having retold the myths and assimilated and integrated them within my poetry and all, the last poem, I just wanted it to be I wonder how much of it is the crowning glory. That's for you to decide as listeners and readers. But I just wanted it to be something of a kind of a new kind of a myth, as it were. And so what happened was that in 1998, geologists, archaeologists in Shimla Hills, just 20 kilometers before Shimla, or 30 kilometers, in a little place called Subathu, they found the remains of the world's oldest whale. So basically, the mother of all whales comes from that one whale, which was found in Shimla. And I came to learn about this. Is a fact not known to many people, but I also learned it, I think, just 3 years ago. And just the moment when I read the news on BBC, I was totally just bowled away. It was just one of those life-changing, life-altering experience that just because your entire concept of mountains and all being the oldest and all, and suddenly to find the oldest whale or the mother, which is called an archaeocete, you find it within your own Shimla Hills. It just did something to me. And this book then gave me the opportunity and so to think more about it in a creative fashion. So what happened was that only the jaw, literally the jaw, complete with all the teeth of that particular archaeocete, was found intact, and it was named, the official name was given, the zoological name, Himalayas subathuensis. So the Himalayas are there, and the word Subathu is also there. It's called Himalayas subathuensis, and my final poem, I'm calling it Himalayas subathuensis. Here too, however, I continue my tryst with myths and mythology. And the moment I heard about this and I learned about this particular myth, this particular discovery, immediately, even back then, 5 years back then, when I learned about the news, I just immediately went back again to the realm of myths and was reminded of the first avatar of Vishnu, which was actually of a giant fish that was found, that basically drew Manu, the father of mankind, to safety. And then Manu began the line, right? So we are mythologically speaking, we are the sons and daughters of Manu, just like in Adam and Eve and all. So it was that flood narrative and Vishnu transforming into a whale of a fish and all, that somehow I tried to marry it with the discovery of this particular fossil. And I should add here, as I was speaking, to repeat what I was telling Saif as well, that I'm very, very aware of how Manu is being regarded and revisited now in the political spectrum and social spectrum, where the treatise, the historical treatise that is attributed to him, Manusmriti, is being publicly banned and publicly burnt and all, and for good reasons, because it is the beginning of patriarchy and of discrimination and all. So I want to acknowledge that at the very outset. However, my poem does not deal with that. And also that when I was doing the research, to go back to the second last question, for Manu and this particular poem, I realized that obviously this is a historical text and this is not a mythological text. So this text has been written by real people and not by a mythical man. It's just been attributed to him. And lots of critics have basically, over the centuries of the ancient times, they wrote Manusmriti. The other thing is also that if you start reading about Manu, you will realize that there are multiple myths about Manu. Many myths, they basically think of Manu as a singular entity. Many myths think of him as a plural entity. So I just wanted to keep that alive. And this poem, in a way, is therefore a homage both to the Himalayas and to this myth that I first heard in my read and heard in my childhood, as well as to this oldest of fossil of the whale that was found in the Shimla Hills in 1998. And I'll just share the screen to be with you again. And yeah, so here it is. Just give me 1 second and I'll be there. All right. I'll just go. Yeah. So here it is. It's called Himalayas subatuensis, the name given to the fossil by the scientists. It's a bit long, so please do bear with me. A common belief: anyone who visits the Himalayas once leaves a part of her soul in their variegated geography, so that the massives never cease to call her back and make her seek that fragment over and drop another against the sense of all closure. That belief morphs into a burning desire for those who acquire longevity in the cedar's embrace, for they know furthermore that it isn't only life that must be cherished amidst these mountains' age-old grace. Dying too holds the greatest allure here in the Himalayan pure. This is the way by which these mountains become the expression of home, the receptacle of humanity. For this is the route that embeddedness takes across time and space, a conduit emanating from the essentials of snow and ice, schist and granite, a power gushing from a point in the beginning when no human walked these non-existent valleys and whales swam in their now forgotten flutes. This is the channel that leads us back to Manu's ship. Manu, the father of mankind, a king famed for his benevolence divine. Once when he was performing the morning prayers on the banks of a river, he found a tiny fish in his cupped hands, muttering with a quiver, "Please save me, O sire of sires, a larger fish has become my mire." The squeaking little creature hoped for a secure future. The moved monarch brought it to his opulent palace and placed it in a water pot devoid of all menace. Checking on the fish the very next morning, Manu was surprised to see it mutating into the size of the vessel and transferred it to a cauldron of metal. The new container also grew small on the subsequent day, for the fish bloated further without any delay. A pool was now sought to serve its increasing lot, and so it happened that its freedom and protection evolved into the king's singular veneration. For he could sense it well that this mushrooming creature belied its ordinary features and was possibly something else, perhaps the divine maker himself. How true was this thought? For when the whalefish was brought to the ocean's fortifications, as all other spaces had exhausted their diverse dimensions, Vishnu emerged from its figure, shining iridescently, half submerged. Said he, "Thank you, O King of Kings, for respecting my magnifying limbs and for giving me shelter from my former welter. Just as you have saved me, I will save you too, for the great flood is bound to erupt and render this universe entirely disrupt. Build a large boat and bring a paired sample of all species within its wooden reaches. Collect some green seeds and think of all your good deeds, for when I will land you ashore, you will need them much as the new life's core." So did Manu as he was bid, and fitted this wondrous world's microcosm within his bounteous boat's bosom. And the flood arrived indisputably, swelling with gigantic tides. But our Indian Noah straddled them far and wide, intently praying for Vishnu's ride. Amidst those leaping waves and their shattering chase, materialized a whale of a fish, the grandest sea creature, steadily sublime, now no longer a miniature, tiny miniature. Calm and composed in this turbulent prose, it drove the ship upon its hip and moored it to safety, finally gesturing Manu to inaugurate the dawn of a fruitful new humanity. As eras passed and men and women thrived, we forgot about that gigantic might, the foundation of our pride. Vishnu, of course, reappeared in several new avatars, but since the oceans always stayed afresh, I believed his whalefish form couldn't have veered too far. When towards the end of the last millennium, geologists discovered the jaws of a prehistoric wonder in the deepness of my beloved Shimla Hills stratum, it transpired that they defined the mouth of the earliest Archaeocete, the mother of all whales, and the commencement of our genesis, Himalayas subatuensis. This is the creature that had known long before time had forward flown, that soil and syllables were married through mystery, and that language is fossil poetry. This is Emerson's words. And that language is fossil poetry. Hence it was that when its remains finally emerged in those hilly terrains, the holotype resolutely reserved a riddle, choosing but a middle to divulge its being through partial means, the den of sound and the trace of teeth that conferred Manu and his line with life-sustaining genes. A fossil is a fulcrum keeping the world afloat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderfully expressed point of view of the whale that you have been life to. And Sapatu especially, you know, my mother is listening. She doesn't keep very well. She's in the Kulu Valley, and Sapatu has very beautiful memories. She belongs to Sirmaur, and I'm sure my mother is smiling right now hearing you speak. So thank you for making us so happy, each one of us. And I do want to, you didn't, you know, read this out. I thought you would, but I think I will. With that, I'll urge all of you here to get a copy of this wonderful book and the entire compilation of the series from lostrocks.net. And Jackie Morris is here, and she was saying that Rob McFarlane, he was listening to you, and it's so wonderful that, you know, Zoom can connect us all and listen to such beautiful words that bring about some kind of transformation at some level. So it started with Fossil by Siddharth Pandey. And what is a fossil? A fossil is a fulcrum keeping the world afloat. A fossil is a fruit of togetherness guiding the pathways of individuality. A fossil is a flight of linearity molding matter into its mystical meaning. A fossil is a feat of forgiveness echoing across time. A fossil is a fire that refuses to become residue. A fossil is a fold of energy welding man to his maker. A fossil is a fusion of past's promise with future's present. A fossil is a fragment that delights in its unending completeness. A fossil is this book by Siddharth Pandey. Go get your copy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sonali. Thank you, everyone. Some of my favorite people are here, and I love you all. And it's just been a huge privilege to have these 3 hours to myself. I am so grateful to everyone in the Himalayas and across the countries. We are, after all, one community. We are all dealing with the greatest threat of climate change. And I think it's very, very important to find as many new ways and as many new expressions as possible to address the only earth that we have. I'm so grateful to Margaret and Justy who are here, who are the best publishers one can ever get. Hi Margaret, she's Margaret. Do say hello. And she's
Hi everybody. This has been a brilliant talk, Siddharth. Thank you so much, and it's been just a real highlight of our project to have published Fossil. And who would have thought that from such a humble beginnings, our project would have reached such a wonderful audience. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Margaret. And thank you, everyone. Meenakshi, Purnima, ma'am, everyone. It's just been a huge honor. Thank you.
It has been an honor for us to have you speak here, and we will post the recording. I've been so lazy in posting recordings, but you know, Siddharth, this is going to be the one that is going to be posted tomorrow. So I promise you that. You've been very patient. I haven't posted the previous talk, but now I'm going to do that. So thank you all. And if you want to be, and if you wish to be connected to the Institute, please follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on WhatsApp. You know, we have to be networked through social media to reach out, because otherwise how could we have interacted and learned about each other? So let's use technology in a good way. And there should be a meeting of the minds in the mountains. Even when you're away from it, the mountains are always calling, they're always there. So with that, on the eve of United Nations, you know, have a conference on climate change, I think this is apt. My friend Mark, who was also a part of this talk, he kind of reminded me. And Siddharth, you know, all the best to you in your work. And this has just been so heartwarming to listen to you. Yeah.
Indeed, it's a huge privilege. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Thank you.